Episode 224, Final Exam Results. At 9 o'clock, the Educational Administration System was updated. The results would be refreshed on the Final Exam Query system and would include rankings as well. This year, Bright Bow High School had thousands of students taking final exams. It would take at least half an hour for the scores of so many to be retrieved from the system database and then ranked. Naturally, the teachers couldn't wait. Almost all of them were picking up their phones at the same time to call their favorite students. After thinking about it, Mr. Scott took out his phone to call Bessy. The phone rang twice before being connected. "Mr. Scott?" Bessy climbed up from her bed and cleared her throat. "What's the matter?" Her voice was very low. Michael had asked his teacher from the medical organization to send some medicines over. With the medicines from him, her hand injury had recovered very quickly, and she had already removed the cast a week ago. Last night, she had even played games with Samuel and Paul until 4 o'clock in the morning. They had only been willing to stop reluctantly after Paul reached the supreme level with 2 stars. As soon as Mr. Scott heard her slightly hoarse voice, he knew that she had just woken up. He was silent for a moment before asking, "You do know that the final exam results are released today, right?" Today? Bessy squinted and remembered that today was the 23rd, the results day. "Oh, thanks, I'll check it later." Mr. Scott was speechless. "Why aren't you checking right away now that you know?" He didn't know what else to say, so he just muttered, "Okay, go back to sleep a little longer." He didn't tell her to check her grades and then inform him after she woke. For some reason, he felt like by the time she woke up, the school's grades would have already been uploaded. Putting down his phone, he walked over to where a guy was processing the data. "Mr. Scott, how did the students in your class do?" The other teachers also finished their phone calls, smiling widely. Their favorite students had done well this time. Glancing at the computer page, Mr. Scott shook his head. "I don't know. I couldn't find out." Hearing this, they exchanged glances, wondering what he meant. Why couldn't you find out? Were the results blocked? This was a possibility. Last year, the results of Luke's final exams at Bright Bow High School couldn't be found. His teacher had been so anxious until several technicians got the system up again. Mr. Scott remained silent and dared not say that Bessy was still sleeping. This kid was too arrogant. "Let's take a look at the results first." He pointed at the computer. According to the statistics, most people's results had already been released. It was a very long list. The technician refreshed the database according to grades. The top 10 were students from the science class. 1 or 2 students from the English class were mixed in. The data was displayed in order: language, mathematics, English, science, total score, city ranking, and school ranking. Scarlett was ranked first at this time: 141, 135, 146, 277, 719. 5, and 1. Due to the bonus point policy, her final total score was 719. This bonus point policy was terrifying. She had increased by 20 points all of a sudden. This year's papers were very difficult. Generally speaking, given the exam's difficulty, a score of 719 was enough to become the city's top scorer. She was only 5th place, though, so how terrifying were the ones before her? With so many high schools in the area, Scarlett's achievement as a top 10 scorer was considered a great accomplishment. Mrs. Lewis finally heaved a sigh of relief after seeing this. In previous years, Bright Bow High School rarely had students who managed to squeeze into the citywide top 10 scorers, much less reach the 5th place. But there was still a hint of gloominess in Mrs. Lewis's eyes. In the past, other than Kenneth, all the top 10 students had been students from her class. Now, 2 students from English class were mixed in. Mary and Ariana Wayne were her 6th and 7th place, respectively. Most importantly, Bessy and Kenneth's results had yet to come out. No one knew how much Bessy was going to score in physics, but it was certainly no problem for her to enter the top 10 scorers in the school. Their results haven't come out? At this point, all the high school students' results had been put in except for Bessy's and Kenneth's. The other teachers took the transcripts of their classes and glanced at the overview of their favorite students. They had yet to study the other results. They didn't leave the office, though, and gathered around the computer, waiting for Bessy's and Kenneth's results. Not yet. The technician minimized the data on the Excel sheet and returned to the first page. He refreshed the page, but their results were still not updated. At this scene, the other teachers froze for a moment before looking at Mr. Scott.
Mr. Scott, it seems like both your students have performed well this time.
Otherwise, why wouldn't their test results be updated? Mr. Scott smiled calmly.
Maybe the system has delayed it.
Though he appeared calm on the surface, his hands were sweating.
It seems like it won't be out for a while.
A teacher returned to his seat, smiling.
Let's sit and wait.
They all faintly felt that Bessy's physics results really might be good. They waited absent-mindedly in the office. All the results of the science class had already been released, but Mrs. Lewis didn't leave either. She saw the results for Chloe, who was in the last place. All her scores were 0, and her ranking was more than 400,000th place in the city. Mrs. Lewis pursed her lips and sat in the corner of the office with the report card, her emotions unpredictable as she waited for Bessy's and Kenneth's results. They waited for another 10 minutes. The staff refreshed the web page as usual, and the page finally changed from none to a display of the results.
It's out! The results are out!
The technician spoke quickly before even looking at it. When the other teachers heard this, they stood up immediately and surrounded the computers. It was Kenneth's results. Because it was a web page and not an Excel sheet, the results were displayed in a different format. Language, 145. Mathematics, 146. English, 150. Science, 291. Total score, 732. City ranking, 2. There was silence in the staff room. Even Mrs. Lewis, who had come over to look in curiosity, had yet to react. Scarlett and Kenneth's results had always been about 20 points away from each other, but because of the bonus points, Scarlett's results were much closer to Kenneth's this time. But who knew that Kenneth would score full marks in English? This time, the English paper had been basically at the same level of difficulty as the mathematics paper. Many people hadn't done well on the English test, so how could Kenneth have scored full marks? The other teachers gave Mr. Scott a dumbfounded look and murmured, "Mr. Scott, he's the city's second-place scorer, and in your class." Mr. Scott wasn't very surprised. During the class gathering, Kenneth had also estimated that his score would be between 725 to 735, but part of the ranking had shocked him. Kenneth didn't have bonus points like Scarlett and had scored 732 with just his abilities. Mr. Scott felt like even he wouldn't be able to score 146 in mathematics. He wasn't at all surprised that Kenneth's results had been intercepted by major universities.
It's just Bessy. Bessy's results are left.
The teachers surrounding the computer finally reacted. At the thought of how Bessy's results were still detained, they urged the technician to quickly retrieve her results. The technician finally reacted.
Oh.
In a flurry, he opened another web page with shaking hands and refreshed it. Everyone stared at the computer page without blinking. The teachers in the staff room, including Mrs. Lewis, stared at the computer screen in astonishment.
Mr. Scott, how many points do you think Bessy scored this time?
Someone asked. Mr. Scott didn't know how she would perform on her physics paper. Physics was so difficult this time. Kenneth had only scored 292 in science, and Scarlett hadn't even exceeded 280 points. Mr. Scott pondered for a moment before saying,
"I guess about the same as Kenneth."
He cautiously estimated that she would probably score around 730. Otherwise, her results wouldn't have been intercepted. Her physics result was probably not too bad. "Those two in your class." There was a moment of silence, and Mr. Scott didn't even brag. The teacher beside him continued speaking. "Are they trying to take the top 3 spots?" Obtaining a score of 730 without any bonus points wasn't something ordinary people could achieve. As soon as he finished saying this, a line of results was displayed on the computer page. Candidate, Bessy. Language, 147. Mathematics, 150. English, 150. Science, 300. Total score, 747. City ranking, 1. There was silence in the staff room. Even Mr. Scott had yet to react. Everyone in the office had been startled to see Kenneth's grades, but their eyes widened in shock at Bessy's results. Nobody was even teasing Mr. Scott anymore, and the person who just spoke stuttered faintly. "Mr. Scott, did you say 730? "What the hell? 730? Mr. Scott was also slack-jawed and speechless. His hands hung at his sides and shook. He had just underestimated his favorite pupil, but who knew that she would drop a bombshell on him? Other than language, she had scored full marks. The city's first place, second place, and fifth place had all come from the same school. The city's first and second places were even from the same class and had scored 747 and 732 without any bonus points. Anyone could predict that now Brightbow High School was going to be all the rage. Mrs. Lewis also held the transcript of her class in her hand and knew all the city rankings based on their scores. Out of the 60 students in their class, excluding Chloe, the other 59 had all entered the top 70,000 scorers in the city. According to the previous score ratio, the top 70,000 were considered average. Among them, the top 20 scorers in the class had reached the top 10,000 in the city and had also scored 100 points higher than the average. So it wouldn't be a problem getting into top universities if they kept their grades up. After all, science class was where top students gathered. As an English teacher, she looked at their English results next. The questions on the final exam paper this time had been very difficult, and even Mrs. Lewis herself wasn't sure she wouldn't have been trapped by the tricky questions. Episode 225. First and second place are in the same class. Scarlett's score of 146 had been very unexpected. The second place in the class had only scored 132 in English. Only 10 students surpassed 120 points. But Kenneth and Bessy had scored 150. The total scores of these two people were far from what she had estimated. The teachers in the school had always pitched those three against one another. But without her bonus points, Scarlett's results simply couldn't match up to the other two. Mrs. Lewis ran over to the computer and stared at the results recorded in a daze. She didn't want the other teachers to see her expression. There was only one thought reverberating in her mind. This time, she didn't even have one strand of hope left. The city's first and second places were both in the same class. Their city's fifth place in her class was simply not enough. Forget about the Excellent Teacher Award. The Academic Affairs Office still remembered the incident last year and was waiting to punish her after the final exams. Mr. Scott didn't care about what other people thought. Now that his class results had all been calculated, he asked the technician to type out the scores of his class. As for the individual subject scores, he would sort them out and send them to each subject teacher. The other teachers gathered around to see the English class's results. They exchanged glances. Mr. Scott, in your class, the top 5 are all within the 1,000th place in the city? In the city, Mary was 91st, Ariana 95th, and Paul 181st. In addition to the top 5, the other students also scored well. According to the estimates, out of 400,000 candidates, 20 students from Mr. Scott's class had scored above the city's average. Although this ratio wasn't a big deal for the science class, for the English class, a normal class. Mr. Scott glanced around, his face filled with increasing joy. He was really happy for the students in his class. Listening to the words of the teacher next to him, he smiled and replied, "It's all thanks to their classmate Bessy. She left a lot of notes for the other students in English class. I heard that there were some notes from Luke, too. Do you know him? He was the nation's top scorer on last year's exam. The guys in the English class play hard and work hard, too, so I'm very proud of them for achieving this result." The other teachers lost their tempers after hearing his remark. How could they not know Luke? When the nation's top scorer had been revealed to be from Brightbow High School, all the major news outlets had reported extensively on it. Brightbow High School was very proud of it. Who would have expected the top scorers of last year and this year to know each other? Mr. Scott was really lucky. He had just randomly picked up a school outcast and was now experiencing this good fortune. The other teachers didn't have such resolution and luck. The teachers were very concerned about the results of the class, and although they hadn't been as sharp-tongued as Mrs. Lewis, they had still been very reluctant about accepting a student who not only dragged the class down, but was also notorious for her misdeeds. Standing alone in the corner, Mrs. Lewis's guts were twisting in her stomach. If Principal White hadn't sent Bessy to her back then, she wouldn't be so depressed now. But Principal White had wanted to put Bessy in their class at the beginning, only for Mrs. Lewis to push her out personally. Half a year ago, she had even given herself the excuse that Bessy might not score well in physics as a means to justify herself. But now, her fists were clenched so tightly that the palms of her hands were almost bleeding. After Bessy and Kenneth's results were updated, the phone of the Academic Affairs Office of Charles Wheeler High School exploded. Bessy Miller, first place in the city, 742. It was explosive news in major high schools and all the media in the city. In Chicago, after hanging up the phone with Mr. Scott, Bessy slept for a while before getting up. Near July, the weather wasn't particularly hot, but it was not cold either. She took a shower and changed into a white t-shirt. When she woke up, she forgot to check her results and simply went downstairs.
Bessy, are you up?
Captain Baldwin was talking to the servant downstairs when he saw Bessy. He turned around and said,
Michael has gone out with Simons to pick him up.
The servant immediately went to the kitchen to bring out Bessy's breakfast, which was warming on the stove.
Pick him up?
Bessy sat down at the dining table and thanked the servant before glancing at Captain Baldwin. What important person needed them to pick him up personally? Captain Baldwin scratched his crown and shook his head.
I don't know. They didn't say.
Propping her legs up, she slowly ate breakfast and didn't ask anything further.
Bessy, why are you up so early?
Samuel yawned and came down from upstairs, still wearing his pajamas.
Are we still playing later?
At the thought of this, he looked at Bessy with shining eyes.
I want to get 3 stars on the Supreme level too.
She glanced at him and said faintly, Let's talk about it later. Samuel went to call Paul on his phone. He wanted to ask if Paul wanted to play games. Paul had always responded immediately in the past, but today he didn't reply even after a long time and seemed to be caught up in something.
Answer me,
Samuel murmured. While talking to Samuel about the game, Bessy forgot that Mr. Scott had told her to check her results. At the same time, inside a limousine not far from the gate, Marvin was driving while Michael sat in the passenger seat. There was another row of seats behind him. Simons and Joshua were sitting back there. Taking out a notebook, Simons flipped through the itinerary.
There are 5 sites in Chicago, 2 of which haven't been developed yet. 3 of them are in Fairfield. I'll arrange them for you.
Simons babbled on, but Joshua wasn't listening anymore. He was naturally imposing, with an upright posture, and he looked noble and strict. Simons went out for a while and stopped when he noticed that Joshua hadn't responded.
Mr. Clark?
The car drove along the path to the gate of the villa.
Yeah?
Joshua glanced at him and replied calmly.
That makes sense.
Simons was speechless. He was the one who had asked Simons to tell him where he was going to visit tomorrow. But Simons was a man with extensive experience. He closed his notebook silently, aware that Joshua's mind was probably not on his itinerary tomorrow. In the passenger seat, Michael was playing on his phone. Joshua held it in until he finally couldn't bear it. He turned his head slightly and asked Simons in a low voice.
That.
Simons bowed his head respectfully.
Bessy is still sleeping. Samuel asked her to play games with him last night. Today the results of the final exams will be released, so I didn't wake her up, lest she becomes upset. Did I ask about the girl?
Joshua said harshly. Simons was speechless. After a while, the car stopped. Joshua coughed and said seriously,
I heard from Marvin that she's very good with the computer engineering and is highly skilled. She'll probably want to major in information technology when she graduates, right?
He had contacted a friend at Northwestern University, spent a lot of money, and had to add a position in the laboratory before he managed to obtain a place in the IT department for Bessy after she graduated. The girl's background was lacking, and Northwestern University was full of ambitious young students. She would probably go to the laboratory after graduating, so this would help her gain a foothold in her career. After all, in Joshua's eyes, power only counted if you held it in your own hands. Listening to Joshua, Simons was speechless. He got out of the car silently and opened the door. Joshua wasn't bothered about Simon's reaction and was still deep in thought. Getting out of the car first, Michael stopped to wait by the door, holding his phone and looking lazy. He seemed to read something interesting on his phone, for his lips curled up in a slight smile and his eyes became more lively. After getting out of the car, Joshua dawdled with his hands behind his back, surveying his surroundings.
"Go in first and don't wait for me. I want to look around," he said. "Okay."
Michael nodded and then turned to look at Simons very accommodatingly.
"Stay with him."
Simons nodded. Once Michael left, Joshua glanced at the butler and reached up to adjust his collar slowly. Simons hurriedly said,
"Mr. Clark, your clothes are the new addition from the store, right? You look very lively in them." "Really?"
Joshua raised an eyebrow and smoothed his sleeves. Then he walked slowly to the door, his expression solemn. Simons followed him with an inscrutable expression. In the hall of the villa, Bessy was playing games with Samuel. The two sat facing each other at the table in the hall. The table was a computer table that Michael had specially installed. It was square and helped them feel immersed when playing games. Sitting facing the door, Bessy wore a short white t-shirt, black jeans, and a pair of slippers. Her legs were propped up as she held the mouse in one hand and tapped a keyboard with the other. She had just washed her hair in the morning, and it was hanging casually around her face at the moment. Overall, she looked a bit wild. Samuel sat opposite her, frantic and absorbed.
"Bessy, save me! Fuck, I'm gonna die! Abandon me! Abandon! I'm gonna die!"
Laughing, Bessy casually manipulated her game cards. Her black hair slid across her cheeks, and she said in a careless, arrogant voice, "Don't panic. Your daddy's coming to save you." Michael walked to the kitchen and brought out a few cups of water. Joshua was speechless after walking in and hearing this sentence. After a round of games, Samuel asked Michael if he wanted to join them. However, after glancing at him and noticing his strange expression, he turned around fully. He almost fell off his chair with fright at the sight of who was behind him. Episode 226. Several talented students emerge. His grip on the mouse loosened and it fell to the ground with a slap.
Mr. Clark?
This person was even more terrifying to Samuel than his own family's patriarch. Samuel stood up immediately, standing at attention. Joshua glanced at him and nodded to him casually. His eyebrows were sharp and imposing. Samuel dared not take a step. Bessy turned away from the computer. She didn't recognize Joshua, but knew that he was probably the person Michael had gone to pick up. She stood up and glanced at Michael. Michael put the cup of water in her hand and said casually,
"Let me introduce you to him. He's my father."
Then he walked over to Joshua and handed him the other cup of water.
"Come in. Don't stand at the door and block Simon's path."
Joshua didn't move. He and Bessy stared at each other holding the cups in their hands. They regarded each other stiffly.
"Let's eat first."
Michael lazily asked some servants to bring up the bowl of soup before looking at Joshua.
"Your morning medicinal meal."
Joshua sat down at the table and started eating, but his eyes were still focused on Bessy and Michael. After asking for Joshua's medicinal meal, Michael glanced at Bessy and asked in a low voice about what she had eaten that morning. "Oh," Bessy replied faintly. "Don't talk to me." Michael paused. Bessy put her hands behind her head. "I don't want to fight with you now." Michael was speechless. He massaged his temples. They spoke very quietly, but Joshua, who was sitting at the table and eating, paused with a spoon in his hand. He stared at the two silently. He finished his meal after a long while. Taking the checkered handkerchief handed over by the butler, he wiped the corners of his mouth and then said majestically,
"Okay, you don't have to look after me anymore. Simons, bring me upstairs to look at the rooms."
Simons took him upstairs. Once those two were upstairs, Samuel wiped the sweat and gave Michael a frightened look. He asked quietly,
Michael, why is your father here?
Michael glanced at Bessy, his forehead throbbing. She still had her hands behind her head. Upstairs, after closing the door, Joshua took out his phone, seemingly relaxed.
This Demon King finally met his opponent?
Simons studied his expression and knew that Joshua was very satisfied with Bessy. He smiled.
Exactly.
Bessy was even more arrogant than Michael. It would be great fun if both of them were to arrive in Evanston. Joshua didn't think much about it. He lowered his head and dialed the most recent number on his phone. It didn't go through on the first try, so Joshua patiently called a second time. After ringing for 10 seconds, it was picked up. It sounded noisy on the other end.
Mr. Clark, why are you calling me again? Is it because of the girl? Of course. I don't know if she likes the computer department, so her major might have to be changed.
Joshua replied calmly. The person on the other end of the phone call was the president of Northwestern University, Emmanuel Flores. The president laughed angrily.
Mr. Clark, don't go too far. Do you think I can randomly change her major?
Joshua walked over to the window and said,
We can discuss it. This year, the resources of the major academic department are still allocated from our family.
The two of them were bargaining. President Flores paused for a while and didn't refuse immediately.
Fine, we'll talk about this again in 2 days. I still have an urgent matter here. What is it? Something so big you don't even care about the resources of your academic departments?
Joshua squinted slightly.
A genius appeared in this year's nationwide exams.
President Flores sounded anxious and his voice was cracking.
But that person's information is a little difficult to find. The Ministry of Education just found the information, so I have to quickly call the family before other universities. I can't let the University of Chicago beat me to it.
Joshua squinted.
Is this person even better than last year's Luke something? I won't go on with you. We'll talk about it in a few days. I can't dilly-dally or someone else will beat me to it.
President Flores finished speaking and immediately hung up the phone. Looking down at his phone, Joshua narrowed his eyes slightly. President Flores was rarely so anxious. Simons was standing beside him and naturally heard President Flores's words. He raised an eyebrow in surprise.
Northwestern University is interested in one of the students?
Joshua tapped his finger on the phone and shook his head.
I am not sure. Evanston's structure is too complicated now, and several universities are competing against one another. Several talented students have emerged from a few families that have monopolized the universities. This year's final exams have been jointly produced by the universities as a way to find those who could hold their own. It seems like the person who shocked President Flores and made him so alarmed is no easy person to find. It could even be that person from a decade ago.
Halfway through, Joshua shook his head. He fell deep into thought and sighed without continuing. But Simons also thought of the same person and was shocked. Joshua said,
We won't mention this matter. The fight among the major forces is the White family's responsibility.
Joshua thought of Bessy's school and asked while walking towards the door,
That girl, has she checked her results?
Hearing this, Simon's expression immediately became more serious. He opened the door for Joshua and lowered his voice.
Let's not mention it today. I'll tell you about Bessy later.
Joshua raised an eyebrow at Simon's apprehensiveness.
Okay, we'll talk later.
Joshua had gone upstairs to bargain with President Flores over Bessy's major. He went downstairs directly after the phone call. Downstairs, Michael, Bessy, and Samuel were still sitting at the square table.
Mr. Clark.
Samuel quickly stood up. Joshua waved his hand and said seriously,
I only came down to roll around.
At the same time, the phone by the sofa rang. Joshua glanced at them before reaching out to pick up the phone. The voice on the other end sounded very gentle and polite.
Excuse me, may I ask if this is Bessy Miller's house? Our school is very interested in Bessy. As for the preferential treatment,
Joshua raised an eyebrow and stuttered doubtfully.
President Flores?
Once Joshua said the words President Flores, the other party stopped abruptly. Both felt like each other's voices were very familiar.
Mr. Clark?
President Flores was also taken aback. They both went silent. After a second, President Flores said quickly,
Sorry, Mr. Clark, I made the wrong call.
They hung up the phone. Tapping his finger on the table, Joshua felt like something wasn't right. During the call upstairs, President Flores had clearly said that he was about to contact this year's final exam top scorers. But the next second, he had dialed the phone downstairs. He had even mentioned Bessy. Joshua glanced at the girl sitting at the table with Michael and Samuel. Of course, he knew. That girl was Bessy. At Northwestern University, President Flores hung up the phone and quickly flipped through the information in front of him. The person beside him asked,
President? It's nothing, I called Mr. Clark again.
President Flores shook his head and pointed at the number on the contact information sheet. He glanced at the call log again and clenched his hands. He thought he had made a mistake and redialed Mr. Clark's phone. But now, looking at the contact number of the landline in Chicago at the top of his phone's address book and comparing it to the number he had finally obtained from the contact information sheet, he realized they were identical. He hadn't called the wrong number. That was the number on the information sheet filled out by the student. As for why Mr. Clark answered the phone, President Flores quickly thought of the girl that Joshua had always talked about. Without any hesitation, he picked up his phone directly and dialed the number again. It didn't go through on the first try. The second try was the same. President Flores dialed for a third time patiently. Just when he was about to hang up reluctantly on the third try, the phone call was finally picked up. In Chicago, Joshua sat on the sofa, withdrawing his gaze from Bessy.
Why are you calling again?
He said into the phone. President Flores was in no mood to joke around and directly said in a serious tone,
The girl you told me about just now was Bessy? The one in Chicago? Yeah.
Joshua was unperturbed. President Flores was speechless. His breath caught in his throat for a while. Then he reached out and tapped the table.
I give my promise regarding what you said just now. On top of that, she will have a full ride scholarship. And I will allocate a large number of resources and bonuses every year.
Joshua clenched his fists on the table, but his voice still sounded as calm as ever.
Sorry, but I will need to reconsider. Before your phone call, the president of the University of Chicago called me.
President Flores almost vomited blood after hearing this.
What are you considering? After all, you really didn't want her to enter your school before.
Joshua continued. President Flores almost choked to death. Who knew that Joshua would try to open the back door for the girl who had clearly performed so well in her exams? Besides, opening the back door, he had made such excessive requests. How could President Flores have agreed so easily? But President Flores was unable to speak of his bitter sufferings and simply agreed with him in a thin voice.
Mr. Clark, then why don't you think it over slowly? Give me a call once you've made a decision.
President Flores suppressed his exasperation. They hung up. Mr. Clark glanced over at Bessy. She wanted to pretend not to notice, but his stare was simply too obvious. She supported her chin with one hand and tilted her head. Glancing at Joshua, she put down the hand holding her chin.
Have you checked the results of your final exams?
Joshua asked. Not yet. Bessy only remembered it now. Joshua nodded and said majestically,
Then check it quickly.
Simons stood next to him and quickly signaled Joshua with his eyes, hinting to him not to touch Bessy's sore spot. Marvin and Samuel's expressions also changed.
Mr. Clark, I heard that you came to see the scenery.
Samuel got up from his chair and smiled.
I wonder if you have any special places you would like to go to. I can take you there. I've already planned the itinerary.
Simon said quickly, glancing at Bessy and Joshua.
Bessy, do you want to go out and relax? People who stay at home are prone to depression.
Joshua glanced at Simons with a calm expression and said,
Sightseeing isn't the urgent matter here. Check her results first.
He was going on about checking the results again? Simons was speechless. He was really touching her sore spot. At this time, the landline phone rang again. Joshua was too far away, so Simons walked over and picked it up.
Hello?
The person on the other end spoke. Episode 227. Two schools compete for Bessy. Samuel watched as Simon's expression seemed to stiffen. After a long while, he gave a numb,
Okay,
and finally said,
I'll ask her about it.
Then he hung up the call. Simons turned around. Samuel stared at him, puzzled.
Simons, who called you? What happened? Are you all right?
Simons glanced stiffly at him.
It was from the University of Chicago's president, inquiring of Bessy if she would be interested in their school. The University of Chicago's president?
Samuel sat up straight and glanced at Bessy as if he had just figured something out.
What the fuck? Bessy, how much did you score? Check your results! Check your results!
The president of the University of Chicago had even called. Samuel naturally knew that last year both universities in Evanston had pulled out all their stops for a student.
There's no need.
Michael glanced at them and reached out to throw his phone on the table.
I've already checked it.
He had checked on the way back to the villa with Joshua just now. His phone was unlocked and showed the column with Bessy's results. Candidate, Bessy Miller. Language, 147. Mathematics, 150. English, 150. Science Comprehensive, 300. Total score, 747. City ranking, 1. Samuel was speechless. Particularly anxious, Simons leaned over to take a look.
Bessy scored.
Joshua didn't speak and stood calmly with his hands behind his back, but after a while, he saw that Samuel and Simons seemed shell-shocked. He coughed, but they still didn't react. Joshua couldn't bear it anymore. He walked over slowly and glanced at the phone on the table. He was also rendered speechless. Samuel and the others had been afraid of Bessy's results and hadn't dared mention them. After seeing her exceptional results, he rescheduled the banquet that he had cancelled. He even took his cell phone and reordered all the banners and screen advertisements in the center of the square. Simons and Marvin added a list of last-minute guests for that night. There were a lot of guests even though it was last minute. Knowing that it was a banquet for Bessy, they all took time out of their schedules, even if they were busy.
There are so many people.
Joshua glanced at the long list of names in Simon's hands, surprised.
Bessy has a lot of classmates.
Simons had looked at the list and seen that the majority were her classmates. He had sought Bessy's approval regarding this point. Her class had performed surprisingly well this time, and none of them made big mistakes, so she had invited most of them. Simons prepared 2 rooms. The larger one was filled with entertainment facilities for the group of students, while the smaller one was for Rick and the other influential people to eat and chat. With his hands behind his back, Joshua glanced at the address, which showed the Madison International Hotel. He nodded and said,
Check if they made any omissions.
Simons turned another page and saw Rick's name with several others. Joshua had already left with his hands behind his back and a calm expression on his face. Simons glanced at him and saw that his legs were shaking. At the same time, the Smith family also prepared a banquet. Anne had scored a total of 649 in the examinations this time. She was about 1,000th place in the city and 19th place in the school. Since she had taken a half-year leave from school to study the violin, her results were still considerably good. It was beyond the Smith family's expectations. Beaming, Grace called Andrea first to tell her about Anne's results. She wanted to invite their family over, but Andrea only congratulated her and said she was busy tonight. What could be more important than the banquet celebrating Anne's final exam results? Pursing her lips, Grace hung up the phone, her expression very bad. "Mom, what's wrong?" Anne asked. These days, the entire Smith family was shrouded in dark clouds due to the Harper family's affairs. There was finally a happy event, so Grace didn't want to mope over having her spirits dampened by Andrea. She shook her head and said, "It's nothing. Go and see what classmates you want to invite." Anne was happy that she performed well this time. She nodded and stopped asking, certainly disinterested in whether Andrea was coming. The two coincidentally arranged their banquets at the Madison International Hotel at the same time. Marvin had been preparing the banquet venue since his return to America. After all, the Madison International Hotel had a large customer base, and it was said that their scheduled bookings were all made at least a month in advance. For the sake of the young students, Simons estimated the time and booked it at 6 in the evening. Then he began to notify her classmates one by one. At the Addams family's house, Paul finally got up from his bed after answering the phone. He sat on his bed thinking about life, then reached out and sent a text message to Kenneth.
"Are you going to Bessy's banquet?"
He replied very quickly, "No." It was lunchtime at the White family's house in Evanston. Kenneth had returned to Evanston the next day after finishing his final exams.
"Chicago's final exam results are out today."
His butler stood beside him and asked,
"Have you checked your results?"
"No." Kenneth put down his cell phone. He put away his fork after finishing his meal, his eyes cold. He knew that the final exam results were published today, but he hadn't checked them yet. His prediction of the exam scores had never been wrong. He glanced at his phone. Anne's chat was below Paul's. Anne had scored less than 280 this time. Since their science results were combined, Kenneth had also asked Scarlett about her combined science results. She hadn't exceeded 280 either. This year's questions had been really difficult. The butler wasn't surprised at Kenneth's answer. The White family had always been school nerds, especially Kenneth's generation, who grew up crushing their peers under their feet. The butler and the people in Evanston wouldn't be surprised even if he was the top scorer of the national exam this time. They would just think of it as a matter of course. The butler saw that Kenneth had finished eating and asked the servants to clear the dishes. He said,
"The exam results have been sent to the universities in Evanston."
Hearing this, Kenneth's eyes finally changed slightly, and he looked up.
"President Flores and the others?"
The butler nodded. Kenneth had yet to check his scores and was unable to sit still. He took his phone and walked back to his room to turn on the computer. The butler knew that he had gone to check his scores. He thought about it before following him. Kenneth remembered his exam number and entered it. When the butler came into the room, the results had already been refreshed on the screen.
732?
The butler stood behind him and smiled in satisfaction when he saw the results. But when he saw that Kenneth's city ranking was second, he was extremely shocked.
"Your score only placed second?"
The questions were jointly produced by several major universities and divided by levels. They were a monstrous level of difficulty for most students. The butler naturally knew that a score of 732 was also considered excellent to Kenneth. He was indeed surprised by his city ranking. Kenneth stared at his score for a long time, the light in his mind dimming. After the final exams, he also remembered that Bessy had drawn the board report with her right hand. Thinking of this, he directly took his phone and flipped to Paul's chat to ask about Bessy's results. Paul's reply was simple and neat. He directly sent a screenshot of Bessy's score. The screenshot was already circulating Brightbow High School's forum in the morning and was even posted on Twitter. Kenneth clicked on it directly. Standing beside him, the butler naturally saw the results and couldn't help but exclaim,
"Total score of 747? This year's national top scorer?"
Kenneth stared at the screenshot for a long time before pushing back the stool and getting up.
"I'm going back to Chicago,"
he said. At 5:40 in the afternoon, the English class students came to the Madison International Hotel, one after another. The top floor of the Madison International Hotel was completely booked by Simons with great pride. The English class was in a room with plenty of entertainment facilities. Michael didn't join them, mainly because Simons felt like his arrival might affect the youngsters' enthusiasm. When Bessy opened the door and went in, she thought she would see a lively atmosphere, but the room was abnormally quiet. They were all sitting on stools and sofas. The lights in the room were bright and everyone's expression was very serious. It was also obviously the first time the 8 waiters inside witnessed such a scene, as they stood on both sides, seemingly at a loss. It wasn't until they saw Simons and Bessy that they heaved a sigh of relief and looked at them questioningly. Bessy entered directly, wearing a peaked cap on her head. Seeing this scene, she pulled off her cap silently and cleared her throat. Calm down, guys." Simons was frozen in place. He wasn't clear about the class's personality. He thought that they were especially angry at this moment. He couldn't help but regret inviting these people. Thinking of this, he glanced involuntarily at Bessy and said nervously,
"Bessy."
Before he could continue, Paul exploded.
"I can't calm down. If you don't take me to the Supreme Level 9 stars, this matter won't end."
The class representative was not to be outdone. I also want to reach the supreme level. I must make a name for myself in the game.
What the fuck? There are so many good things waiting for me.
The boys clamored one after another, but the girls couldn't keep acting and fell on the sofa giggling. Bessy was too familiar with their antics. There are too many people, just 1 star, she said.
No, are we the kind of people who can be bribed with 1 star?
Pulling a chair out, Bessy sat down, crossed her arms, and lifted her chin. The class representative took the lead to pour a cup of tea for her respectfully.
Bessy, let's take it slowly. There's no rush. If it's too tiring for you to bring us to 9 stars, 1 star will do. We would like to stay at 1 star.
Simon stared at the group of people with a dazed expression. WTF? What were they talking about? He originally thought Bessy might fight with them, but it was resolved already? Episode 228. Celebratory Banquets at the Madison International Hotel. Simons, you can go to the other room now. Bessy took the tea from the class representative before looking at Simons and telling him to leave. Dazed, Simons left the big room and entered the small room. In the small room, Joshua was sitting down rigidly in a new suit. Because it was last minute, Grace didn't manage to book a good room, so Anne's banquet was being held in the hall on the 18th floor. The Smith family would give Anne respect now. Anne also invited her class. Only a few of them came, and the rest of the guests were the Smith family's business partners. As for the Watson family relatives, Grace only called them to inform them of the news. Due to the time constraint, she didn't invite them all. Anne was successful in her final exams and was also a celebrity in the Evanston Violin Association. Even Elise put aside her business early in the morning and hurried back from Evanston. Elise was part of the Perez family in Evanston and was different from the rest of the Smith family. Thus, Grace and Anne personally went to the airport to pick her up. Anne sat with Elise in the back seat while Grace sat in the passenger seat. I also heard that this time the final exams are highly valued by several major universities. Elise squinted slightly when she heard Anne's results. If you keep your scores up, they should be enough for Northwestern University's art department. Only those who ranked in the top 200 in the city could enter Northwestern University each year. With her scores, it was rather difficult for Anne to enter Northwestern University, but it was more than enough as an art student. Furthermore, she was Mr. Anderson's apprentice, which was a huge bonus. Grace smiled and said proudly,
Anne just called her teacher. He's also very satisfied.
Glancing at Grace, Elise tucked a piece of hair behind her ears and smiled. Yes. Oh, I remember that Bessy also took the examination this year. How did she do? News of Bessy's injury and the Harper family's affairs had been blocked due to the heavy implications of such things, so Elise only knew that the Harper family had lost power, but was unaware of the connection to Bessy. Grace was taken aback. She had been calling the Smith and Wilson families all day and had forgotten about Bessy's examination. At the mention of this, her smile faded a little, and her thoughts also became a little heavy. Thinking of her cold relationship with Bessy, she pursed her lips and said,
She injured her hand and couldn't take her final exams this year.
Oh, really? Elise smiled faintly and didn't continue talking about it. She had fought with Bessy before and naturally knew she was a school outcast. She had only mentioned this to make some chit-chat. Grace's expression was slightly stiff. As for Anne, after her results, her mind had been on this year's Evanston Violin Association nominations. If Elise hadn't mentioned Bessy, she would have already forgotten about her. As for how she scored, she simply didn't care and wasn't bothered. The Smith family's car was parked in the hotel parking lot. The hotel would show congratulatory messages on the screen at the gate of every banquet and would play them in turns if there were too many banquets being held. Wedding celebrations, baby shower celebrations, birthday celebrations, and final exam celebrations. Tonight, the majority were Chicago's celebratory final exam messages. Grace and the others got out of the car. Today, the parking spaces of the Madison International Hotel were almost full. Grace led the other two towards the gate. Anne took out her phone and glanced at it. Squinting, she put it away after seeing that Kenneth had yet to reply to her invitation. It was already 6 o'clock in the evening, but since it was summer, the sun had yet to completely set and the street lights were still not turned on. But the messages on the screen above the hotel entrance were still very obvious. Glancing up, Anne just happened to see the congratulatory message for their room. Warmest congratulations to Anne for getting a high score of 649 in her final exams. After only one glance, she looked away nonchalantly. Elise took out her phone and took a photo of it to post on her circle of friends. Then she turned to Anne and said, "Let's go." They took the lead and walked 2 steps forward, but when they arrived at the gate, Grace wasn't with them. Anne looked back in surprise. Standing back from the gate, Grace was looking up at the congratulatory messages on the screen with widened eyes. "Mom?" Anne exchanged glances with Elise, both of them surprised. She took a step forward to see what it was. "What did you see?" She walked up to Grace and followed her gaze. The carousel on the screen was not over yet, and another congratulatory message was displayed. "Our hotel and all the staff warmly congratulate Bessy for being the city's top scorer with a high score of 747 in her final exams." Anne hadn't paid attention to who the top scorer of the final exams was. She thought it was either Kenneth or Scarlett, both of whom she wasn't very concerned about. But what was displayed on the screen now? Bessy was the citywide top scorer with a high score of 747? Their Bessy? How was it possible? Anne's mind was boggled, and she let her imagination run wild. It was just someone with the same name. It must be only the same name. This year's paper was so difficult. How could Bessy score 747? Anne wondered if she was in a dream now. Her score of 649 was already highly bragged about by the Smith family. The higher the scores, the more significant the gap. There was only a gap of 98 points between 747 and 649, but it meant that they were worlds apart. Speechless, Grace only took out her phone and entered Brightbow High School's official website. She was so shocked that her fingers trembled a little, and after several clicks, she finally entered the official web page. The first news page that popped up on the official website was the final exams page. Both the city's first and second place scorers were from Brightbow High School. Grace stared with widened eyes at the phone. The first place was Bessy. From the English class at Brightbow High School, she could almost hear the thumping of her heart as it beat extremely fast, almost jumping out of her chest.
"What's wrong?"
David had arrived a little later due to his work and didn't expect the 3 of them to still be standing at the hotel gate. Grace's ears were roaring and she couldn't hear any sound from the outside world. She just stared at her phone blankly, not responding to him. David was puzzled by her lack of response. The congratulatory message on the screen had already jumped to the next person, so David hadn't seen it. But he noticed the phone in Grace's hand. So he looked down at it, and his usually gentle face split instantly.
The top scorer is Bessy?"
Because of Bessy's final exam results, the Smith family was in a daze. Bessy and the others were naturally unaware of this.
"These students are so energetic."
Joshua looked out into the big room after finally seeing Bessy's classmates leave. Usually, he would have already fallen asleep at this late hour, but today, he was still full of energy. Those in the small room were old and had left at 10 o'clock. Joshua had stayed behind to chat with Michael and the others.
"Since when do you know the White family so well?"
He sat down on the sofa and glanced at Michael energetically, holding a cup of medicinal tea in his hands. Unlike his good posture, Michael was leaning lazily against the sofa, feeling slightly sleepy.
"I'm not very close to them,"
he replied, but he was sober after hearing this question. Standing up, he straightened his sleeves and then said calmly,
"I'll go over to the other room."
Joshua nodded. Once Michael left, he turned to glance at Marvin. Marvin calmly explained,
"Mr. Clark, Principal White is very familiar to Bessy."
Trembling slightly while holding the cup, Joshua narrowed his eyes majestically.
"You didn't tell me that before,"
Marvin replied.
"I only found out later."
Joshua slammed the teacup on the table.
"Then why didn't you tell me then?" "But you didn't ask me again,"
Marvin said stiffly. Joshua was speechless. Samuel, sitting beside Joshua, almost applauded Marvin. Marvin dared to refute Mr. Clark? Joshua glanced coldly at Marvin. Then he fell deep in thought. His line of thought was different from Samuel, Marvin, and the others. Principal White hadn't been in Evanston these past 2 years, so he and the others had been puzzled by his behavior. But now, Marvin said that Bessy knew Principal White. Picking up his teacup again, a thought slowly emerged in Joshua's heart. He couldn't help but look towards the other room.
Mr. Clark, the tea is cold. Should I get a new cup for you?
Simons reached out for Joshua's teacup.
No.
Joshua shook his head, exhaling deeply.
The temperature is just right.
The dinner on the top floor lasted until midnight. This was probably the first time after school ended that everyone gathered. Everyone had gone their separate ways, and in reality, it was too difficult for them to find time to gather. Hence, the class lingered and didn't leave. They stayed until 1 o'clock in the morning. Simons found a few drivers and sent them home, one by one. The nation's scores had all been released. Bessy's scores were well deserving of the first place, and Kenneth also followed closely behind in second place. The fact that the first and second place scorers on the national examinations appeared in the same city attracted much attention from the media. A wave of coverage happened even on Twitter. The next day after the scores were released, reporters flocked to Chicago. Brightbow High School called Bessy's cell phone from time to time. Several of the calls were from Mr. Scott and the dean, so even though Bessy didn't block their numbers, she was still quite annoyed. At the Evanston airport, Mr. Grint got off the plane and directly called Bessy. Due to his performance schedule, he couldn't attend her banquet, but he had called to congratulate her beforehand. After returning to America, he called her eagerly.
When are you coming to the Evanston Association?
Mr. Grint handed his luggage to the person beside him and asked in a calm tone.
Soon or a while later?
Bessy had just gotten up. Her head ached as she held a toothbrush and her phone in each hand. Tomorrow, I'll go over tomorrow. It was annoying. People were getting in at every opening every day. She felt like Evanston was a refuge for her at this time. At first, she had planned to return to Fairfield, but thinking about it, she put down her toothbrush and guessed that Fairfield must have already hung up banners. Mr. Grint's eyes lit up and his voice rose a few degrees.
Okay, I'll get ready quickly.
He hung up and began planning. Episode 229. Ready to go to Evanston. The banquet's itinerary must be pushed up, and the new members of the association this year must be redrawn. As for the systematic study of Bessy's violin, Mr. Grint had already planned it out several years ago. He had laid the groundwork in his heart. The National Violin Association's assistant, who was leading the way with the luggage, was a little surprised to see Mr. Grint's expression. Mr. Grint was a profound figure on the altar of the violin industry, and it was rare to see him so happy. What happy event could have happened? In Chicago, Bessy washed her face and changed her clothes before going downstairs. Downstairs, Simons dutifully held a travel guide while explaining to Joshua, who held a cup of tea and listened faintly, about the different scenic spots.
Mr. Clark, we'll go to a celebrity's former residence tomorrow. That's a developmental scenic area.
Joshua said,
Oh,
wanly, and continued.
I know that place. The scenery is very good.
Simons glanced at him and didn't reply. Michael returned from his morning run at the same time. He went up and changed into a white shirt. At the same time, the chef prepared breakfast for him and Bessy. I'm going to Evanston tomorrow. Bessy was sipping on her milk and suddenly thought she should mention it. She sat upright and glanced at Michael. Michael knew that Mr. Grint was coming back today and wasn't surprised. He simply asked Marvin to prepare the ticket. But their conversation dropped a bomb on Joshua. He was shocked.
You're going to Evanston tomorrow? All of a sudden? Why?
Picking up his fork, Michael heard this and looked at Joshua very amiably.
Yeah, we're going tomorrow. You still have to see Chicago scenery, so we'll take our leave first.
Joshua was silent for a while before turning to glance at Simons. Simons put away the little notebook in his hand.
Mr. Clark, I think the plot of land in our backyard, the old building that Samuel and Michael often visited when they were young, is very good.
Simons suggested very considerately. Reaching out to knock on the table, Joshua said with a serious expression,
Since that's the case, let's go back to Evanston. Arrange the plane tickets for us.
Simons was speechless. Since they were going back together, Simons would arrange their tickets. There weren't many planes in Evanston and Chicago. Even though Kenneth had rushed, he arrived at Paul's house in the middle of the night after Bessy's banquet. He didn't manage to attend the banquet or meet anyone from the class. Paul was drunk and his mother had to drag him out of bed. At this time, he walked downstairs in a bad mood and yawned.
Kenny, Bessy is going to Evanston tomorrow.
Kenneth was taken aback.
Evanston? Yeah.
Reaching out, Paul pulled a pillow to him and leaned his chin on it. Speaking of this, he glanced at Kenneth involuntarily.
I thought you wouldn't come back. I just wanted to ask her.
Kenneth glanced out the door and stopped halfway. He fell into deep thought and pursed his lips silently.
But Bessy scored full marks in physics.
At the thought of the complicated science papers and then of Bessy's terrifying results, Paul jolted up and chuckled lowly.
I heard that the art teacher bet 1 month of her salary on her and made a fortune overnight. Getting full marks in science this time is a different matter, because of the Flores family's participation in the final exams.
Kenneth glanced at Paul.
Do you know Evanston's structure?
Paul was dumbfounded.
My mom mentioned it before.
Kenneth took a cup of water from Paul's mother and thanked her before continuing.
There are thousands of families in Evanston who have developed a series of systems. Evanston is divided into 4 factions. 3 of them are run by the Clark, White, and Miller families, respectively. The Clark family is the most powerful. As for the Miller and Flores families, they already hit the skids a few years ago and have faded out to being almost replaced by the Flake family.
Although Paul had never been to Evanston, his mother had told him about the structure there after his final exams.
There's still the Bright and Soup families, right? Both those families belong to the Clark family. They've been very prominent in Evanston for the past 10 years. The Flores and Miller families have almost been forgotten after fading out, and most people only know of the 5 big families in Evanston. The Clarks, the Brights, the Whites, the Soups, and the Flakes. They don't know about the big 4 factions.
Kenneth explained lightly.
Several colleges have reviewed the results of the final exams for 3 consecutive years for recruitment and scholarship purposes. But now, the current structure of the 5 major families in Evanston is about to be broken.
Paul wasn't at all drowsy now. He hadn't known that there would be so many open fights and covert maneuvers over a final exam. No wonder the examinations had been more difficult this year. He still had 2 months left before going to Evanston, so his mind was on another matter now. But those people around Bessy, Michael, Samuel, and Principal White, made up almost half of the 5 major families in Evanston. It was the afternoon in Fairfield. The Miller family lived in town in a 2-bedroom apartment with a small layout. However, James's wife had brought James and Tucker to eat with her brother's family, the Fielders, that afternoon.
Tina scored 530 points, which is 30 points higher than the average,
Mr. Fielder, James's brother-in-law, was saying. Everyone around the table congratulated the Fielder family about her score. A young girl held up her soda and replied with a proud expression, "It's average. I didn't do very well." "Tina, you have great potential. You can go to the big cities." James's wife raised a glass of wine for a toast and then patted Tucker on the head. "Learn from your cousin Tina, Tucker." Mr. Fielder glanced at James and said,
"James, you have to take care of Tucker. He can't stay in this small town forever and be a good-for-nothing like you." "Yes, yes."
James just picked up his fork and ate silently. Mr. Fielder kept looking at him, thinking that only his sister would have fancied a loafer like James.
"This year's final exam's top scorer has the last name Miller," Mr. Fielder said. "Your family's last name is also Miller. Tucker, you—"
Before he could finish his sentence, someone knocked on the door outside.
Mr. Fielder, come out quickly, the mayor is here."
The mayor? For so many years, neither family had seen the mayor of Fairfield.
Mr. Fielder said in shock. "Why is the mayor looking for me?"
He walked out and saw the mayor, as well as several onlookers who were hoping to see a show. Bessy's final exam results only came out yesterday, and news of it had been overwhelming in Chicago. On the other hand, Fairfield was remote, and news of the top scorer had passed on slowly since yesterday morning. The mayor only heard about it this morning and had thus rushed down with banners and pennants.
"You're Mr. Miller, right?"
The mayor passed by Mr. Fielder and walked over to James.
"Congratulations, you've raised the 2nd top scorer from our town. Bessy is the city's top scorer with an average score of 747. This is a $10,000 scholarship awarded by the town. I have brought a few reporters with me. Clean up a little and let them interview the top scorer's family."
Both families were in a state of confusion and were at a loss for words. Glancing at the banners and pennants on their shoulders, Tucker couldn't help but frown distastefully.
"Dad, I'll go home now."
But James didn't reply to him. The streets of Fairfield weren't big. It was just a small town in a remote area. There were only 3 streets in total, and the Miller family's house was 2 streets down. Tucker took the key and went home. After crossing one street, he saw a middle-aged man standing at the end. Frowning, he turned to walk down another street. The middle-aged man saw Tucker and immediately caught up with him.
"Kid, wait a minute. I'm not a bad guy. I'm Bessy's—"
He was so annoying. Tucker put his headphones in his ears and continued walking. The next day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Bessy and the others got off the plane at Evanston Airport. They headed towards the black commercial car arranged by the Clark family. Joshua took the lead with a serious face. Bessy followed him, and Michael followed Bessy with the luggage. Wearing black sunglasses on the bridge of his nose and taking long strides with his slender legs, he easily stood out among the crowd. Michael pulled the luggage and said lazily,
"Dad, go back to the old house."
Joshua was walking calmly, with his back straightened when he heard this. Pausing, he asked,
"What about you?"
Michael glanced at him and raised an eyebrow.
"How many times have you seen me stay there?"
Joshua walked forward and was silent for a long while before asking,
"Then where are you staying?" "Highline Apartments."
Highline Apartments was a luxury apartment building on the edge of Northwestern University's campus. As the best land around the area, an apartment there was more expensive than a suburban villa.
"Then we'll drop you off first,"
Joshua said. Bessy followed Michael and lowered her cap calmly. Her phone rang. Mr. Grint was asking for her address while she was in town. After asking Michael, she sent the address to Mr. Grint. Half an hour later, they arrived at the Highline Apartments building. Michael's apartment was on a duplex floor. It was 5,000 square feet. Exhausted from the long journey, Joshua sat down on the sofa and didn't leave immediately. Simons glanced at him, but didn't hurry him. Bessy went upstairs to put away her luggage, then went to wash her face in the bathroom. The phone, sitting on the sink, rang before she was finished. It was Jared. She reached out to get a towel and wiped her hands clean before picking it up. "What's wrong?" Jared didn't beat around the bush and asked directly.
"You're in Evanston?"
"I just arrived. How did you know?" Bessy asked suspiciously. On the other end of the phone, Jared walked down a hallway with his hands in his pocket and smiled.
"Sorry, it's my professional habit. Many people are paying attention to your movements these days."
Oh. Bessy walked out to her room and dumped out the contents of her backpack on the table before rummaging through them.
"For now, it's the White, Flores, and Flake families."
Jared didn't sound bothered.
"I'll send the details to you later."
After a pause, he asked again,
"What did you do behind my back?"
He wanted to know why so many families were keeping an eye on her. Her arrival in Evanston felt strange. Of course, they weren't investigating the lone wolf, but Bessy... Who knows? Just send me the information. Glancing at the things on the table, Bessy felt too lazy to put it away and simply walked downstairs. "If there's nothing else, I'm hanging up."
"Wait,"
Jared said immediately.
"When will we meet?"
Bessy put a hand behind her head and said calmly, "Get in line." Episode 232. Her terrifying talent in playing the violin. At 8:30 a.m., Michael, Bessy, and the others were already at the door of the National Violin Association. Mr. Alston had already been informed of Bessy's arrival and was now standing in the parking lot waiting for them. "Mr. Alston." Bessy greeted Mr. Alston very politely. "Miss Miller, follow me." Although Bessy had saluted him as Mr. Alston, he didn't dare to put on airs. After all, she was an apprentice of Mr. Grint's, whose status in the violin world was unshakable. Mr. Grint had only reported Bessy's name in the evening 2 days ago, so several personal procedures hadn't been completed. Mr. Alston first brought her to the data collection room. Michael's phone rang, so he stopped at the door and answered it in a low voice. Standing at the door gave him a good view, and he could observe the situation inside. The call was from Joshua.
"President Flores has called me several times."
On the other end of his phone, Joshua stood in an ornate corridor and played with a parrot.
"Has Bessy decided which school she wants to go to?"
Northwestern University and the University of Chicago were both highly ranked, especially Northwestern University, which had risen rapidly in the rankings in recent years. Michael leaned on the doorframe and raised an eyebrow indifferently.
"Don't you already know? Northwestern University."
He would only repeat it once.
"Oh, I see. That's all."
After getting the answer, Joshua didn't hang up immediately and paused for a long while before saying,
"Your sister came back last night and asked where you were." "I see."
Michael glanced at the information collection room.
"I'm hanging up first. I still have matters to attend to."
He hung up the phone. After the phone call, Joshua was silent. Not long after that, President Flores returned from running an errand to purchase bird food and couldn't help but ask,
"Mr. Clark, Say something. Did Bessy choose the University of Chicago?
He had been running errands for Joshua since yesterday, and only today did Joshua finally agree to help him get to the bottom of this. Noticing Joshua's solemn expression, President Flores once again wanted to strangle himself for bargaining with him several days ago.
No, she didn't.
Joshua glanced at the bird food. President Flores handed it to him quickly, like a lackey.
Here.
Grabbing a few pieces of bird feed, Joshua fed them to the parrot before saying slowly,
She chose Northwestern University. Really?
President Flores' eyes lit up and the heavy atmosphere around him seemed to vanish.
Then I'll go back and get the files ready immediately. As for the bird feed, Mr. Clark, you can use it.
Not far away, Simons walked over with 2 cups of tea, speechless. Bessy was still inside the National Violin Association's collection room. The room wasn't big and had a total of 5 computer desks. The left side was separated by glass, and rows of documents could be seen. On the right side were the computer desks, and further to the right was the photo collection point. Professional cameras, a fingerprint enrollment device, and a computer were placed there. When Mr. Alston came in, the person inside stood up immediately and greeted him.
Director Alston.
Mr. Alston was under Mr. Grint and had also been the president of the other associations before. He had always held great power, so everyone in the Violin Association knew of his big name. Compared to the other departments of the Violin Association, the data collection office's size was the bare minimum. The staff here rarely saw Mr. Alston and Mr. Grint. Hence, they were surprised to see him here.
Bessy, come and record your information.
Mr. Alston greeted the person inside before looking at Bessy.
Take a picture, then record your fingerprint.
The worker immediately got to work and sat down in front of the computer. After taking a picture of Bessy, he opened the association's information entry network.
Director Alston, are you here to join the meeting today?
He asked after opening the web page. Mr. Alston nodded as the staff opened the general information collection page. Many people had come to participate in the exhibition today, but not many could successfully join the association and be taken under a teacher's wings. Those who came to participate in the exhibition had already reported their names and recorded their data half a month ago. If they didn't successfully pass the exhibition, their information would be directly deleted from the general information network. After more than half a year in Evanston, Mr. Alston naturally knew the grading method here, and had the input staff click on the button for entry of ordinary information. He asked him to open the input for the students. Shocked, the input staff clicked on it quickly. Mr. Alston handed him a printed form. After retrieving Bessy's fingerprints and taking her picture, the staff began filling in the information on the form.
Take your time filling it in. I'll take Miss Miller to the performance hall.
Mr. Alston nodded at them and took her away. Once they had left, the people in the office gathered around.
Senior member? Who is she?
They exchanged glances and watched as the staff recorded Bessy's information. Without even participating in today's exhibition, she was already a senior member. At nearly 9 o'clock, Mr. Alston took Bessy backstage and handed her a pass that said number 17.
Bessy, this is your pass for the exhibition. It was drawn at random.
Bessy glanced at it before hanging it on her waist and walking forward. Samuel reached out and patted her shoulder.
Break a leg.
Bessy raised an eyebrow. After noting a few more precautions, Mr. Alston turned to Michael, Samuel, and the others.
Michael, please follow me to the audience seats.
Today's exhibition was an internal performance, and the parents could watch from the audience. The second row of the internal personnel section had been reserved for them. Marvin and Samuel both walked in first, while Michael sat in the outside seat. 7 teachers had reserved seats in the first row. They were all old members of the association, and a few of them were judges. After each performance, the 7 teachers would give their corresponding scores. As long as more than half of them agreed, the student could successfully join the association. 6 of those people were already sitting down, and the empty seat on the far left was reserved for Mr. Alston. They were discussing which new member stood out more when they saw Mr. Alston. They stood up and greeted him.
Director Alston. Director Alston, why are you here to watch the assessment?
Mr. Alston was undeniably a powerful figure in the association. He generally only managed the senior students' assessment, and he was responsible for many other things. His arrival at this entry assessment was a little bizarre, so the other teachers were extremely surprised.
I'm here to take a look at the quality of this year's students.
Mr. Alston laughed softly. Before the start of the assessment, a teacher took a look at the list of the order of appearance and laughed.
There are indeed a few seedlings this year. Number 6 and 9 might be put in level 4. We'll probably fight over who will get these two as their students. Director Alston, do you have any intentions of accepting a student? If you do, you won't even have to compete with us. As Mr. Grint's well-known subordinate, the students would definitely know who to choose. Sitting down, Mr. Alston picked up a pen and smiled. Not necessarily. What do you mean? Someone asked. It won't necessarily be number 6 and number 9. Mr. Alston glanced at the stage. The competitions at the association's exhibition had been finalized after a series of selections. The minimum registration standard was the amateur 9th level. Other than technique, these teachers valued talent and spirituality. Thus, they had obtained a general description of each person, but they exchanged glances after hearing Mr. Alston. If it wasn't necessarily number 6 and 9, then who else could it be? Backstage, the first male performer got ready. He was holding his violin, his palms full of sweat. The first and last performers always suffered, no matter the competition. The first performer didn't have any previous performance as a benchmark, so the scores varied quite a bit, but when combined, the total score was still high. About 20 competitors were in the exhibition, and several knew each other. They had either met at various competitions or conversed before the start of this competition, so they were mostly familiar with each other. Among them, Bessy stood out like a sore thumb. The other participants of the exhibition were sure that they had never seen her before. After all, they would definitely remember such a good-looking person. Are you here for the exhibition too, number 17? Someone asked sweetly. Bessy looked up. A girl with short hair was looking sideways at her. Her eyes were black and bright, and she had a baby face. She wasn't very good-looking, and her friendly expression wasn't as natural as Mary's. The exhibition pass hanging on her wrist said number 6. Bessy glanced at her and muttered coldly, "Yeah." Everyone who knew Bessy knew she was always cold, but the baby-faced girl was probably accustomed to being sought after and didn't expect to be treated so coldly. Her sweet smile collapsed for a moment. Pursing her lips, she smiled again. "My name is Maria Hutchinson. What's your name? Why haven't I seen you before?" "Bessy Miller. I've never been here before." Bessy reached out and pressed her peak cap down on her head. "Bessy Miller?" The girl squinted. She had never heard this name in the assessment before, and she didn't want to waste her time on an unknown student. Furthermore, since Bessy was so indifferent, Maria just smiled casually and didn't carry on chatting. Instead, she walked towards the entrance and waited for the first male performer to ask him about his scores. Bessy realized that once Maria left, she was no longer being sized up by the others. The others also distanced themselves from her, as if she was no threat. Squinting slightly, Bessy decided to stop looking at them as well. "You're the first person who remained so calm after hearing Maria Hutchinson's name," she heard someone saying as she pulled her peak cap down. Turning slightly, the first thing she saw was a head of curly hair. The other party pulled out the stool next to her and sat down, tilting her head to look at Bessy. She was very good-looking and was also a little charming. The exhibition pass on her waist was number 12. Episode 233. Senior Member. "Oh?" Bessy leaned back in her chair and raised an eyebrow. "I'm Ava Hutchinson." Ava was very interested in Bessy. Putting her chin on her hand, she stared at her and started gossiping. Maria turned into an overnight celebrity after her first assessment. Most people guessed that she would become Mr. Anderson's next apprentice and Anne's junior. As for Anne, you'll know who she is if you enter the association. Ava continued. "Look at everyone. Who doesn't want to be on good terms with Maria?" Ava thought for a while and laughed. "It's because they all know that if they have a good relationship with Maria, they'll have a higher chance of seeing Mr. Anderson when they enter the association. If they're lucky, they might even receive some pointers from him. Who wouldn't want to climb higher in the violin association? Some people lacked talent, but after showing off in front of the bigwigs, they might still play small roles in the Royal Theatre in the future." The 20-something competitors were divided into two groups. One group had fewer people and were lone rangers like Bessy, while the other group was centered on Maria. After hearing Ava's words, Bessy nodded and lowered her hat again without showing much reaction. Ava smiled when she saw that she didn't seem interested in Maria. On stage, the first boy finished his performance. His skills were average, but his spirituality and emotions were good, and he was rather talented, so the 7 teachers didn't need to discuss much. The majority of them gave him 60 to 80 points,
When it was Mr. Alston's turn, he gave him 50 points. But more than half of the teachers gave him a pass, so the first boy still got the pass card. The other 6 teachers stared at the score, and the first teacher couldn't help but glance at Mr. Alston. Director Alston, isn't 50 points too low? Thousands of people signed up for the Evanston Violin Association every year. After receiving layers of assessment, the people who could finally arrive here were all very capable. Other than some rare exceptions, the teachers rarely failed them. Mr. Alston frowned. He could be better. These people haven't gone through the systematic training of the association, after all, so they can't be compared to the official students. A teacher couldn't help but laugh when he heard Mr. Alston's words. He felt like Mr. Alston was too demanding of this group of new students. However, since Mr. Alston followed Mr. Grint and was used to hearing Mr. Grint play the violin, it was understandable that he was harsh to ordinary students. So these people were calm when Mr. Alston gave a failed grade to the first 5 performers. When the 6th performer, whom the teachers had their eyes on, came on stage, they sat up straight in unison. In the second row, Marvin was feeling a little drowsy ever since the first violin performance. Sitting beside him, Samuel wasn't as bored. He didn't usually watch such performances, but because he could play the piano, he didn't find the violin performances dull. Furthermore, those who were selected for the final exhibition of the Violin Association were exceptional and were better in terms of skills and emotions when compared to Samuel's piano playing. Samuel also understood that. After the 6th performance, he couldn't help but glance at Michael. This girl performed several times better than the previous ones. This time, Director Alston should give her a pass, right? The other 6 teachers all scored her at around 90 points. Maria received the highest score of all the other performers so far, and Mr. Alston indeed passed her. However, he only gave her 60 points. She only just managed to pass. On stage, Maria's expression remained unchanged after receiving Mr. Alston's score of 60. She smiled and bowed while holding her violin, saying that she would work harder. When she went backstage, she was surrounded by the others, who asked her about her scores. Director Alston only gave me 60 points. Maria took out her scorecard and sounded very disappointed. Oh my God, Director Alston actually passed you? The others couldn't help staring enviously at her. I thought he was just an unsentimental violinist. He failed all the others. Director Alston is so strict. If he was a piano teacher and I played in front of him, would he kick me out? Samuel touched his nose involuntarily. Michael put his hand on the armrest and looked at him indifferently. After a few more people played, Mr. Alston only passed number 9. Both number 6 and number 9 received only 60 points. The other teachers already knew of Mr. Alston's high standards, and after the most anticipated performer, number 6, they didn't expect he would be very impressed by any of the other performers. Number 12 has spirituality, but she's lacking in skills. The 7 teachers gave Ava 70 to 80 points, which wasn't an exceptional score. Her profile states that she's an artist. One of the teachers frowned. These teachers were very serious about the violin. Most of the artists at the association, however, wanted to add skills in order to obtain a glamorous resume and personality. But since this performer's comprehensive level was on par to the standards, the teachers didn't nitpick her. They gave lower scores to the following performers. After this, none of the scores reached 90 points. Let's see how many are left. A teacher stood up to move about. Next, number 17, Bessy Miller. Let her come up. Mr. Alston immediately sat upright and stared at the stage with a serious expression. If the other teachers had been paying attention, they would have definitely noticed the change. In the second row, Marvin was slapped awake by Samuel. Wake up, it's Bessy's turn. Marvin sat up in a daze. Michael's expression remained unchanged, but he stared intently at the stage. The lights around the stage turned off, leaving only one spotlight. It was hot in Evanston, so Bessy wore a white t-shirt and black jeans. She held the bow with her slender fingers and began to play. When her first note sounded, all the teachers studying Bessy's information sheet looked up. Bessy was naturally very serious when she devoted herself to something. Standing upright, her thin figure was almost one with the violin and its music. The bow danced on the strings and the sonorous notes pranced about, seemingly soaked in emotion. Most of the association's students were well versed in intermediate and high-level skills, like glissandos and harmonics, but none of them managed to integrate those skills into their playing so beautifully. Her standard was so high. True, she didn't use many techniques and didn't put all her fingering skills in one note like the number 6 performer. And the skills she incorporated were a little lackluster. But what did it matter? What did it matter? The teachers couldn't help but stand up. Their hearts were surging with the music. Even the drowsy Marvin sat upright involuntarily. His eyes lit up and he stared at Bessy. At this time, he was full of vigor and wanted to find Alexander and the others valiantly and fight with them. Michael listened seriously. This was the terrifying prodigy that Mr. Grint had set his eyes on. At the end of the 5-minute exhibition performance, everyone was immersed in the waves of emotions.
Who is this Bessy Miller? Why haven't I heard of her before?
The faces of the teachers were flushed with excitement. No way. If such a student signed up, we would have heard of her.
She has already reached the standards of level 5, right?
The 6 teachers discussed amongst themselves for a while, then turned to look at Mr. Alston. They suddenly remembered what he had said at the start.
Mr. Alston,
Mr. Alston also sucked in a deep breath. He was different from the other teachers. Although he had never heard Bessy play in real life, he had watched her video from Mr. Grint. Her talent for the violin was extraordinary. But just like Mr. Grint, Mr. Alston also felt Bessy was too carefree. She learned everything too easily and was likely to go astray. But today, Mr. Alston finally realized why Mr. Grint was so insistent on Bessy. This girl's performance was almost invincible. If she could be persistent, he felt like soon there would be another Mr. Grint who could perform a solo concert in the Royal Recital Hall of Austria. After regaining his composure, he turned to the teachers and smiled.
Teachers, let's score her.
He lowered his head and wrote his score on the scoreboard. The others exchanged glances and felt very perplexed. How should they score her? According to their understanding, this performance was perfect. But a full mark? It had not appeared since the establishment of the association. But they didn't have much time to think. They hurriedly wrote down their scores. In the second row, Samuel said,
"What the fuck? Bessy plays the violin so well? No wonder Mr. Grint followed her for so many years."
Samuel finally suppressed the vigor in his body and turned to Michael.
"Michael, how many points will the teachers give her? Is it possible to get over 90 points from every teacher?"
These teachers wouldn't be too easy on the students. Even Maria, who had the highest average score, only received above 90 points from 3 teachers. The other 3 teachers had given a score of 80+, while Mr. Alston had given her 60. Michael continued staring at the stage and lifted his chin.
"Of course."
While they were talking, the teachers had already shown their scores. The first teacher was true to his heart. 100, 95, 98, 95, 95, 95. Although the other teachers followed the rules and didn't dare to give 100, their scores of 95 and above were affirmation towards Bessy. This was an unprecedentedly grand occasion. Everyone was focused on Mr. Alston's score. He wrote quickly and under everyone's attention, calmly showed his score. 0? What the fuck? Both Samuel and the other teachers felt like Mr. Alston was going overboard. He had even passed number 6 and number 9. Even if it wasn't 90 points, he should have at least given her 80 points. Mr. Alston didn't explain anything and just glanced at Bessy.
"I hope that you can obtain a score from me 2 months from now."
Bessy went backstage. While waiting for the 18th performer, the other 6 teachers couldn't help but say to Mr. Alston,
"Director Alston, you're too harsh on this student. This number 17 is so good that only Anne can compare to her."
Mr. Alston glanced at them.
"Was I harsh?"
The other teachers were speechless. Wasn't this considered harsh? Episode 234, The Violin Exhibition. Mr. Alston just picked up the information sheet. He really didn't think he was harsh. The other 6 teachers had compared Bessy to the students of the Evanston Violin Association, and she was indeed outstanding in comparison. But Mr. Grint also had his expectations of her. Bessy had very clearly reached level 5. But Mr. Grint's requirement was for her to reach level 6 in one summer vacation. So Mr. Alston would give her the score she deserved after summer vacation. Compare her to the students of the association? This wasn't Mr. Grint's intention. They weren't on the same level after all. From the very beginning, he had placed Bessy among the group of prodigies in Austria's International Violin Organization. Compared to the group of prodigies who had been trained since they were young, who were talented and willing to work hard. Bessy had received almost no systematic training and had not touched the violin for a long time. She deserved the 0. However, Mr. Alston didn't explain this to anyone. Bessy's final average score was 82.57. The other teachers' scores were very high, but her average was pulled down by Mr. Alston's score. They could leave after their performance, so Ava had already left more than half an hour ago. But Maria and the others had stayed. They couldn't see the situation on stage. When she came back, Bessy's expression was the same, and she didn't look particularly excited. At first glance, they guessed that her performance hadn't been good. Furthermore, they had never heard of her name. Maria and the others weren't concerned about her. Bessy took the hat she had left on her seat and left. Michael, Samuel, and the others had also left and were waiting at the gate. Samuel was still complaining to Michael about Mr. Alston. He originally thought Mr. Alston would give Bessy full marks. Leaning against the wall, Michael bit a cigarette in his mouth and had his phone to his ear. He seemed to be on the phone, but he was responding casually without saying much. He didn't stand up straight until he saw Bessy walking over. Looking in her direction, his eyebrows relaxed and his expression seemed to be especially warm, like beams of sunlight streaming through a hazy day. His expression couldn't be seen clearly because of the haze, but his gaze could be felt. Bessy was like a box of treasures to everyone. The deeper they dug, the more surprises they discovered. He stared at Bessy, his cigarette unlit. He threw the cigarette into the trash can and smiled calmly.
"Let's go."
He hung up the phone very coolly. Bessy felt a little uncomfortable under his intense gaze. She coughed and redirected his attention by asking, "Who were you calling?" Glancing at her, Michael took the hat from her hand and put it on her head slowly.
"My sister. She invited us to dinner. Do you want to go?"
Bessy was speechless. She had only asked casually. Walking ahead, Samuel was still thinking about Mr. Alston when he heard this. He first glanced at the time on his phone before turning around.
"Bessy, it's almost noon now. It's time to eat. Shall we eat together?"
His expression was at ease and no different than usual. Michael followed behind Bessy with both hands in his pockets. He raised an eyebrow at Samuel and gave him an approving glance for the first time. Samuel was almost moved to tears. This was the first time Michael looked at him like he wasn't a fool. Glancing at Samuel, Bessy pulled down her hat and cleared her throat. "I'm a little sleepy." Michael smiled.
"Then let's go back to take a nap first."
At the Evanston Financial Center, a secretary wearing black frame glasses came in and handed a stack of documents to a woman in a black dress, sitting in an office chair.
"Miss," the secretary said, "this is your schedule for today."
The woman looked down, appearing astute and capable. There was a computer in front of her, its screen showing a pair of complicated red and green candlestick charts. Taking the file from the secretary, she looked up, revealing her delicate and slightly domineering facial features.
"What's the schedule in the afternoon?"
Her real age was very hard to tell, but judging by her looks, you might have guessed she was about 30 years old. She was Michael's sister, Rosemary Clark. She was 35 years old and unmarried.
"You have a contract appointment with the president at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, then a small regular meeting at 2:30.
The secretary pushed his glasses up and spoke quickly.
"What did my younger brother say?"
Rosemary glanced at the time on her watch. It was 11:40. The secretary shook his head. Rosemary raised an eyebrow and smiled in understanding. Picking up a pen from the pen holder, she signed the document on the table and then leaned back in her chair. Crossing her arms around her chest, she was silent for a long time before saying,
"Help me make a list of gifts that young girls like these days."
To be favored by such a successful career woman, Secretary Peterson's professional ability was the cream of the crop in the secretarial industry. He was a right-hand man that Joshua had specially arranged for Rosemary. After arranging the schedule, he continued,
"I have arranged an auction for you in 3 days.
Rosemary massaged her eyebrows and felt slightly tired.
"There's a daylily available?"
Joshua wasn't in good health and had to wear a daylily around his neck to bring relief. This was an old family superstition, but nobody knew where daylilies originated. Most of them had appeared by chance, so every auction was a bloodbath.
"Yes, but there's only 1 bottle at the auction this time."
"1 bottle?" Rosemary tapped her fingers on the table. This wasn't good. Rosemary went to the auction house once a month, and 10 bottles of daylilies were sold each month. There were numerous people in Evanston, several major laboratories, and many researchers of the daylily. In each auction, 4 of those 10 bottles were reserved for a few people, and Rosemary was one of them. The remaining 6 bottles were left to the other forces to fight over, but there was only 1 bottle left this month. Everyone needed this bottle of daylily and would definitely fight for it. Why is there only 1 bottle left? Secretary Peterson shook his head and made a guess. Maybe something happened. The Research Institute said that this kind of flower is extremely difficult to cultivate. It seemed like the only possibility. Nobody knows the origin of the daylily yet? Rosemary knew that finding the peddler would secure a stable source, but the auction house didn't have any information. To avoid disputes, the auction house didn't even know the names of the buyers and sellers, so Rosemary had no way of finding out. Secretary Peterson nodded. Mr. Clark already asked Miss Flake about it some time ago. As everyone knew, 129 had accepted someone from the Flake family as an ordinary member for the first time. They rarely accepted fresh blood, and half of the recruits were only allowed to become ordinary members. It was extremely difficult to become a senior member, but even as an ordinary member, they could learn numerous things from 129 and enjoy the right to share data with the internal members. As everyone knew, the 129's intelligence network had an iron grip over the whole world. Every family and power in Evanston wanted to form an alliance with 129. Although Sherry was only an ordinary member, as an insider, she still had much more privilege than those on the outside. When she succeeded in breaking into 129, the Flake family's position in Evanston had skyrocketed. Rosemary nodded. Make me an appointment with Sherry. I want to talk to her. I'm already trying to, but it might be a little difficult. Sherry was currently extremely sought after. She also knew how to hold people's hearts and wouldn't make an appointment with just anyone. I heard that Michael is also looking for Sherry. Oh? Rosemary nodded and stayed silent. She waved her hand to dismiss her secretary, then sent another message to Michael, asking him when he could eat with her. At the same time, Bessy and the others returned to the Highline apartments. Bessy didn't practice the violin when she went upstairs. She wanted to perfect her newest arrangement first. Noah Hyber hadn't taken the initiative to contact her for 2 months due to her final exams, although he hadn't really believed that she was taking the examination. Now that she was in the Violin Association, she had to attend sessions officially starting tomorrow and wouldn't have a lot of time. Thus, she was prepared to finish both of Noah's arrangements today. She had already worked on these arrangements after her final exams, but her hand was inconvenienced at the time. The arrangement had only taken shape in her mind, and she had perfected it after her results. She was almost done and could probably finish the remaining parts by tomorrow. Downstairs, Marvin first went to look at the 2 potted plants by the window, then took the watering can to water them. After he finished, he put the watering can down and took out his phone. He went to Twitter. Mary had posted, "Mimi ate up almost all the flowers. Dad punished her by not allowing her to eat meat for 3 days. Then she posted a gloating GIF. Marvin knew that Mary was the only person Bessy followed on Twitter. Mary had also posted about Mimi getting punished to face the wall last time. Marvin really couldn't help but feel bewildered. Why was the Smith family so harsh on the cat? Wasn't it just flowers? He sent Mary a Twitter message. "It's just a cat after all. You can't ask too much of it." She replied with a string of ... When Patrick came up the stairs from the connected staircase and saw Marvin muttering to himself, he raised an eyebrow and asked, "What are you muttering about? Where's Michael?" Marvin repeated the harshness of the Smith family to Patrick before answering his question. "Michael is upstairs." "You still have a black box downstairs. You can sort the things out yourself." Patrick didn't care about the cat or flowers and simply went upstairs to find Michael. Marvin remembered the black box. It was filled with miscellaneous things. He went down to open the black box and sorted the things out one by one. Most of them were graduation gifts that the English class had asked him to bring to Bessy when they left. There were quite a few gifts. He noticed a glass bottle rolling in the corner of the box. It was a graduation gift from Mary. Thinking of Daniel's stone, he carefully observed the small bottle. This time he confirmed that there was no serial number on it, and there wasn't even a cap. He couldn't help but want to ask why this girl couldn't get over a flower. Episode 235, Mysterious Daylilies. The next day, Bessy went to class at the Violin Association. After getting up at 6, she left at 6:30 and bumped into Michael, who had just returned from a morning run. He took her to the Violin Association.
Mr. Grint has set a date for the apprenticeship banquet.
Mr. Grint had discussed directly with Michael and had written down the time in the calendar last night. Bessy was chatting with Mary and just gave a very casual, "Oh." She put her hand on the car window and supported her chin. "As long as it's not too extravagant." They arrived at the Violin Association after 40 minutes. Getting out, Bessy put on her hood and put one hand in her pocket. She waved behind her casually without looking back. Michael leaned on the side of the car and stared after her for a while before opening the car door and getting in. Because new students were coming today, the Violin Association had a road sign for them, pointing to the practice building, which was 5 stories tall. At the gate, a teacher stood waiting for all the students. Bessy was 10 minutes early, while Ava hurried over after her. The teacher waited for everyone before saying,
"I'm the teacher on the first floor. My last name is Williams. Everyone who can enter the Violin Association must have a certain amount of talent, so we do not lack talented students. You must have heard the rules of the Violin Association. We have special repertoires and grading assessment standards. From the 1st to 5th floor are the practice rooms of the 3rd to 9th levels. Each floor has its instructor and training videos. We'll announce the corresponding levels of all students according to the assessment during yesterday's exhibition competition. Before that, please advance to room 101.
Bessy looked down at the manual in her hand. Level 3 was on the 1st floor. The 4th and 5th levels were on the 2nd floor. The 6th and 7th levels were on the 3rd floor. Level 8 was on the 4th floor. Level 9 was on the 5th floor. After listening to the introduction from Mr. Williams, the teacher on the 1st floor, the newcomers bowed their heads excitedly and started discussing amongst themselves. Mr. Williams led everyone inside. They first stopped in a shared space on the 1st floor. The teacher building had a total of 5 floors, but there were no stairs. There were 3 elevators on the left and right sides of the shared space on the 1st floor. Mr. Williams stopped by the elevator and explained to them,
"Each student will have his own card. The elevator has a card swiping system. Students in higher levels can enter the lower floors, but lower levels can only stay on the lower floors."
That was to say, the students in the 3rd level could only enter the 1st floor, but the 4th and 5th levels could enter both the 1st floor and their own floor. Standing beside Bessy, Ava wore dark sunglasses perched on the bridge of her nose. She didn't talk to anyone else and didn't communicate much with Bessy either. She was about to follow Bessy inside when she heard someone calling her from behind. It was a middle-aged woman. Pausing, Ava took a step back and took off her sunglasses. She stopped beside the middle-aged woman. "What is it?" The middle-aged woman was her manager.
"I told you to build a good relationship with Maria's group, but you—"
The manager lowered her voice, wishing she could make Ava be someone she wasn't. "I can't mix with them." Ava played with her sunglasses and lifted her chin slightly. "And do you really think they would like me?" Ava neither knew anyone in the association nor had anyone in her family who had influence in the Violin Association. Her violin skills were average, and just as the teachers had guessed, she was only here to make connections. The manager glanced at her.
"Can't you learn from how Victoria came back from retirement?"
Ava didn't reply to this. After a moment, she said, "Are there any other warnings? If not, I'm going in." The manager waved her away in distaste. Then she thought of something.
"Hey, wait."
Reaching out, she gestured for Ava to come back.
"Does the girl you talked to have any plans of entering the entertainment industry?"
Ava rolled her eyes. Her manager was talking about Bessy. Bessy was indeed an exemplar in the eyes of scouts. Not only was she outstanding in terms of appearance, but also in temperament. "I don't know. I'll help you ask, but it's unlikely. With her looks, do you think she'd have to wait for you if she wanted to enter the entertainment industry?" Ava put her sunglasses away, clipping them to her collar, and laughed lazily. "I'm going in." The manager almost kicked her. Class 101 was filled with musical instruments at the back. In front of the instruments were seats, clearly separated from the instruments. Similar to a lecture theater, the seats were in rows. Looking around, Ava saw that Maria's group was sitting in the middle, while the others were scattered on both sides. Bessy was sitting on the left side, leaning against the wall. She supported her chin with one hand and placed the manual on the table with her other hand. Her legs were propped up, and she sat very casually. Without hesitation, Ava went to sit in Bessy's row. Mr. Williams wasn't there for the time being, so the others were conversing with each other in low voices. their excitement uncontrollable. Ava turned her attention to Bessy, staring at her face carefully for a long time before asking, "Have you ever thought of entering the entertainment industry?" Bessy tilted her head and squinted. "I'm not interested." Noah's manager had asked her countless times. Ava nodded. It was as she expected. Mr. Williams came in at this time. He held a piece of paper in one hand and a pile of cards in the other. Glancing at it, Bessy knew at first glance that these were the cards for the members of the association.
Since each practice room can only have 4 students practicing at the same time, you will be split into groups of 4.
Mr. Williams glanced at the paper in his hand.
There are 26 of you, so 2 groups will only have 3 members. Everyone can take a look.
He turned on the projector and showed everyone the 7 groups. The first group was headed by Bessy, followed by students named Henson and Amelia. The second group was headed by Maria, Ava, and a boy. It was the other 3-person group. The next 5 groups were all 4 people. Everyone exchanged glances after seeing the groupings. Most of the students were familiar with one another, so some were overjoyed at the groupings, while others were very depressed. For example, the boy who had been put into Maria's group was ecstatic. After all, most of the new members here knew that Maria was associated with the higher-level students and was likely to be a level 4 student here. Hence, they could practice on the 2nd floor with her. Some people felt extremely depressed, like Amelia, who was sitting beside Maria. She didn't expect to be placed in Bessy's group, especially since she had never heard of her before. "Maria, why am I so unlucky? I didn't get to be in your group." Amelia complained in a whisper to Maria. Maria was accustomed to such flattery. "New students can change groups freely. Since my group still has space, you can ask Mr. Williams to let you join my group." Amelia's eyes lit up. Mr. Williams saw that they were finished reading and said,
"Do you have any questions? If not—"
"Teacher," Amelia raised her hand, "I want to be in the same group as Maria Hutchinson." Mr. Williams glanced at Amelia.
"What's your name?"
"Amelia Robinson." Hearing this, Ava's slightly gloomy face suddenly became sober, and she also stood up with her hands raised. "Mr. Williams, I'm Ava Hutchinson. I can change groups with Amelia." Hearing this, Mr. Williams flipped through the list and squinted at them.
"Are you 2 certain?"
Amelia stared at Ava like she was a fool. Everyone in the classroom was racking their brain to be in the same group as Maria, but she voluntarily wanted to change her group. After receiving their confirmation, Mr. Williams helped Ava and Amelia change their groups. "Henson, do you want to change teams?" Maria glanced at him in the back seat very amiably. Henson shook his head, uninterested in her.
"No need."
Maria nodded and remained silent. After some changes, the list was finalized. Mr. Williams began to issue the student cards.
"Be quiet, everyone. Next, I'll distribute the student cards. It'll determine your authority to study in the association for these 2 months. Of course, the higher your level, the greater the authority. If anyone feels like they didn't perform well last time, they can raise their hands and retake the examination at the office." No one raised their hands. After all, the last assessment had been of the utmost importance to them, and they had tried their best. Retaking the exam wouldn't make a difference. Mr. Williams started issuing the cards. "Come up to take your card when I call your name. Karen Michaels, level 3. Timothy Parrish, level 3.
Unsurprisingly, the majority of the students were placed in the 3rd level. He called a few more names.
Maria Hutchinson, level 4.
Everyone glanced at Maria. Mr. Williams handed her the card and said in a much gentler voice,
"Take it and go to the 2nd floor later. You can come down and consult me if you have any questions." Amelia Robinson, level 3. Ava Hutchinson, level 3. Henson Weber, level 4.
The class was in an uproar when they heard this. Most of the people in the classroom stared at Henson and Maria. Henson had been number 9, and the 6 teachers had placed him in the 4th level after much discussion. He was talented but lacked some skills. The quality of the students this year wasn't particularly high. Mr. Williams glanced at Henson and felt very pleased. He thought that the assessment at the end of the summer next year would surely be very exciting, and some students might even go to Austria for further studies. But that was impossible for this group of new students this year. Episode 237, An Opportunity.
"There's only 1 bottle of daylilies in the auction house."
Secretary Peterson frowned.
"I haven't received any news about the seller, but I think Michael has found Sherry."
"Let him find her." Rosemary waved her hand dismissively. "It's fine as long as I can get the daylily and solve my dad's affairs." Secretary Peterson nodded. While they were talking, a slender figure walked over from the rock garden unhurriedly. Along the way, many people addressed him as Joshua's youngest son. It was Michael. Rosemary stopped talking and lifted her chin as Michael approached. "If you don't come back again soon, our oldest brother will nag Dad about it for another year," she told him. Michael was unbothered and looked a little lazy.
"Let him nag."
"So, that little girl doesn't have the intention to meet me?" Rosemary followed him to the main villa and said in an amused voice, "I've already prepared her present." Although she was in her 30s, she had aged well, and almost no fine lines could be seen around her eyes.
"She has been in a good mood lately."
Michael put his hands behind his head and smiled lazily.
"Her friend is coming the day after tomorrow. I might have an opportunity to bring her soon."
"Friend?" Rosemary glanced at him in amusement. "What kind of friend? Can I meet her?"
"We'll see."
Michael squinted absent-mindedly. While they talked, they had made their way to the main villa. Joshua, Aaron, and the others were sitting at the dining table. Aaron's face was dark, obviously very dissatisfied with waiting for Michael. Standing at the dining table, Simons smiled at Michael and Rosemary and even glanced behind them expectantly. But when he saw no one, his smile faded and he said stiffly,
"Miss Rosemary, Michael."
Michael was obviously used to this and lightly pulled out the chair to sit.
"Dad, brother, sister-in-law,"
Aaron said with a cold face.
"Little bro, can't you come back and do something practical? Don't expect to rely on your family forever."
"What are you two talking about?"
Once Rosemary and Michael were seated at the table, Joshua picked up the fork and interrupted him. Aaron's expression darkened. Reaching out for a piece of fish, Rosemary raised an eyebrow. "We were talking about the girl. Her friend is coming tomorrow. Michael said she's in a good mood."
"Friend?"
Joshua asked.
"Her deskmate in high school. She also wants to attend Northwestern University."
Michael replied concisely. Joshua nodded and remained silent. Rosemary glanced at Aaron and smiled. "Big brother, sister-in-law, we're eating together tomorrow. Are you coming?"
"No."
Aaron glanced at her and rejected her coldly.
"I have other matters to attend to."
Rosemary knew that Aaron had an appointment with Sherry tomorrow. She simply smiled without exposing him. If the daylily could be found, they could resolve not only Joshua's problems, but also talk of cooperation in Evanston with the merchant. Aaron would never give up on any opportunity like that. "You really have a girlfriend? Little bro, when will you bring her back?" Their sister-in-law was also from a prestigious family. At this time, she was smiling gently, but because she hadn't aged as well as Rosemary, some fine lines could be seen between her eyebrows. The others at the dining table pricked up their ears when they heard this, waiting for Michael's answer. Eating slowly, Michael suddenly chuckled lowly, seemingly amused by what she had said. His eyebrows were relaxed when he said,
"She's just an ordinary person, but her temper is bad. After a while, when she's accustomed to Evanston, I'll bring her here. I hope you won't bully her then."
Joshua paused and stared at Michael. Bully her? Why was he so good at tricking people? Michael asked calmly,
"Dad, why are you looking at me?"
Joshua was too tired to reply. The others didn't know what to make of their expressions and just exchanged glances. They thought of the rumor that had spread some time ago. The girl Michael was with seemed to be from a small village. The Clark family had made university arrangements for Michael's girlfriend and had sacrificed a lot. After dinner, Rosemary and Michael sat with Joshua for a while. Joshua lived in the main villa off the big courtyard. Inside the house, they were burning sandalwood to calm his nerves. The floor was covered with a heavy carpet, and there was a glass bottle on the table with a piece of green flower inside. But it was wilting a little, and the leaves were yellowish. Rosemary's expression turned serious. After staying for an hour, Michael left with Rosemary. At the same time, Aaron returned to the east wing after eating. Not long after that, a man in a black suit knocked on the door respectfully and then came in. Aaron sat down at the coffee table and took a sip of tea from the teacup. He put the teacup down and asked when he saw the man,
"Is everything set?" "Miss Flake has settled the time. It'll be at 6 o'clock tomorrow afternoon."
The man leaned over and replied,
"Okay, tomorrow afternoon at 6 o'clock.
Aaron stood up with his hands behind his back, the joy on his face unconcealed.
"Go and prepare a gift."
He had made the appointment with Sherry tomorrow mainly for the daylily. For the first time in the Evanston circle, someone had gained membership to the 129 Club. Ordinary people had never heard of the 129, but these old families in Evanston were well versed. 129 was not only involved in Evanston, but also dipped into international affairs. The CIA was looking for 129. Someone said that whoever could successfully take down 129 would control almost half of the power in Evanston. Such a temptation was ever present. Too many forces were curious about Sherry. It wasn't an easy feat to make an appointment with her, and would definitely take more effort once various news came out in the future. Since this was a crucial moment, Aaron naturally wouldn't be distracted by Michael. His relationship with Michael wasn't very good, so there was no need to waste time on his little girlfriend and one of her high school classmates. There were more important things to do tomorrow. Back at the Highline Apartments, Bessy practiced the violin upstairs after dinner. Mr. Grint had given her a 2-month plan for her goal, from various books to various practices. According to Austria's curriculum, he gave 1 book every 3 days. In total, he had listed 20 books and 10 practice songs for her. Ordinary people would find it difficult to read 20 books in 2 months and to practice 10 tunes proficiently and fluently after reading those books. Bessy pulled up her chair and sat down to take out the 3 books from her black backpack. As soon as she took it out, her phone lit up. It was a video call from Mary. Picking it up, Bessy let it lean on one side of a teacup, then put the book on the table. Since it was night, Mary's video was a little dark, but the car was still visible and the lights were turned on in the back seat. "Bessy, we'll arrive tomorrow." "Okay." Leaning back in her chair, Bessy propped her legs up casually. "I'll send you the address." "Paul and the others said that they'll have to wait until school starts." Mary thought for a while and continued. "I think Scarlett is waiting for her uncle to come back, but I don't know when." Secretary Peterson started the car and drove towards their destination.
"Miss, you'll have to control your temper later."
At the red light, Secretary Peterson stopped the car and glanced in the rearview mirror.
"Even if there's something wrong with Miss Miller, don't say it out loud."
Rosemary's personality was rather prickly and fussy, so Secretary Peterson was a little worried about the meeting later. He was different from everyone else in Evanston. Everyone thought that Rosemary's company had been founded by her and Michael, in partnership, and that Michael had simply relied on his sister and the Clark family without putting in any effort. But Secretary Peterson had been with them ever since the start of the business. Thus, he naturally knew that in the early days of the company's establishment, most of the planning had been done by Michael. After the company got on the right track, Michael hadn't even taken any dividends and had directly transferred his shares to Rosemary. Of course, Rosemary didn't take this for granted. She would transfer a sum of money to Michael's card at the end of each year. Secretary Peterson didn't want the siblings to be estranged because of this incident. Rosemary waved her hand indifferently in reply. "No need for your reminder." While they talked, they finally reached the address sent by Michael. Secretary Peterson threw the car keys to the security guard and told him to park the car, while he followed Rosemary upstairs. Bessy had just arrived at the restaurant. At this moment, she was slightly leaning against the wall, with her leg propped up against it. She sent her location to Mary. Mary had been in the city before and would come directly there. Bessy was wearing a white t-shirt today, along with a black and white plaid shirt over the top of it. She held a cap in her hand, which she turned around casually. Her earphones were in both ears and she was sucking on a lollipop. Clarissa was talking on her phone. "You're really not coming to the club?" After a while, Bessy played casually with her peaked cap. "Matthew hasn't placed an order recently, has he?" She was talking about Matthew's search for Bee by hiring Lone Wolf. "Matthew seems preoccupied with something else lately. Austria's forces have been a mess recently, so how could he be free to place an order?" Clarissa unscrewed a bottle of Coke and took a sip. "Also, be careful in Evanston. Your grandma's matters aren't so simple." "I know." Bessy pulled the peaked cap to one side and unbuttoned the bottom of her shirt. She smiled casually. "Dad is waiting for them." When she finished speaking, she looked up and saw a man and a woman enter the restaurant. Reaching out, she pulled off her earphones and tucked them into her pocket. Then, she turned to give way and walked towards the bathroom. The oncoming man and woman were Rosemary and Secretary Peterson. The two parties passed by one another. Without seeing the girl's face, but only her side profile. Rosemary thought she was very pretty. After Bessy entered the bathroom, Rosemary paused and laughed. Girls these days are quite cool. Do you think Michael's girlfriend will be like...
Stop.
Secretary Peterson glanced at Rosemary.
Don't imagine what kind of person Miss Miller is.
Episode 238. Gifts from the Smith Family. Rosemary felt like this indeed wasn't good for her relationship with Michael's girlfriend, so she stopped mentioning it and felt regretful. It would actually have been pretty good if Michael's girlfriend looked like that. They stopped at the door of the room, and Rosemary didn't knock on the door immediately. Instead, she tidied her hair, then glanced up and down at the clothes she was wearing. She'd had a business talk this morning and was wearing a white shirt and suit pants. The corners of her shirt were stuffed into her pants, and her hair was also pulled up. She looked like a very smart and capable career woman.
Secretary Peterson, do I look out of place?
She tugged at her sleeves and turned around slightly. Secretary Peterson's mouth twitched.
Miss, this is your usual image. It's very good.
Nodding, Rosemary knocked on the door 3 times. Within a few seconds, Marvin opened the door, holding a teapot in his hand.
Rosemary.
He nodded slightly and turned sideways to give way for them. The 5 brothers of the Clark family only obeyed Michael, especially Patrick and Christopher. Marvin's attitude was considered the better one among the 5 brothers. Rosemary wouldn't fuss over Marvin's attitude anyways. She walked inside and glanced at the dining table calmly. Michael was sitting by the window. Marvin poured tea at the empty seat beside him. The girl apparently hadn't arrived yet. Rosemary's tense body relaxed and she sat in a seat where she could see the door. She raised a delicate eyebrow and asked, "Where is she? Don't trick me." Michael leaned back in his chair and replied lazily,
"She went to the bathroom."
Rosemary nodded and chatted distractedly with him. Before long, the door opened. Rosemary immediately sat up straight and stared intently at the door. A rather familiar figure entered. The last button of her black and white plaid shirt had been undone, and the shirt was now casually draping down. Her brows and eyes were drooping down, but the wildness and brashness in her face was blatant. Her side profile looked good, but from the front, her face looked even more attractive. Before seeing her, Rosemary had fantasized about what she would look like. After Secretary Peterson's reminder, she had felt like she could accept it even if Michael's girlfriend wasn't that pretty. After all, Simons had reminded him that she had many other qualities. There was a saying in Evanston that it might be impossible to find someone worthy of the Clark family's crown prince. Rosemary had also agreed, but after seeing Bessy, she felt like this saying could now be changed. Marvin pulled Bessy's chair out for her very skillfully and asked,
"Bessy, is Mary here yet?"
His tone and actions were very respectful. Because of this, Rosemary and Secretary Peterson, who had been taken aback, were pulled back to reality. This time, they were very surprised by Marvin's attitude. He had even been dismissive towards Rosemary. Bessy waved casually to Marvin and instructed with ease, "She's probably arriving soon. Go down and pick them up."
"Okay."
Marvin nodded. He gave a slight bow to Rosemary before going downstairs. Michael saw that Rosemary had yet to react and chuckled lightly before raising his chin and introducing her.
"This is my sister,"
he said to Bessy. She had been immersed in the business industry for many years, after all, so her reaction time was very fast. With a somewhat heroic spirit, she said in a very gentle tone to Bessy, "Bessy, right? Sorry for taking the liberty to disturb you today." And so, these two met for the first time. One was an elite career woman, while the other was a tyrant in her village and at school. These were clearly 2 different types of people, but surprisingly, they were quite in sync in one aspect. They weren't the slightest bit awkward. Rosemary was originally sitting on Michael's side and facing the door. Halfway through the conversation, she took her bag and moved to sit beside Bessy. Marvin brought Mary's family inside silently. The Smith family had come in a van and had parked it downstairs. Mary's mother and father walked in front while Mary followed behind them with a small white plastic bag. Mary's father had met Michael during the parent meeting for Mary before, so they naturally remembered each other. He was wearing black pants that were rolled up along with his shirt sleeves. Carrying a straw hat in his hand, he looked simple, like an ordinary florist. Marvin poured another glass of water for Bessy, then stood beside Rosemary and whispered,
The Smith family grows flowers and plants. Their daughter was Bessy's deskmate.
Rosemary nodded calmly, expressing her understanding. The group of people had a lively meal. Michael picked up his fork and talked with Mary's father.
How's your business going? Not very good. A lot of flowers were chewed up by my pet.
Mary's father shook his head and grimaced.
That's really a shame.
Michael was taken aback and smiled helplessly. To the side, Marvin was speechless. Michael was able to say anything for the sake of Bessy. Mary's father had a drink with him. On the other side of the table, Rosemary originally thought she wouldn't have much to talk about with Mary's mother. But once they started talking, the conversation flowed rather well. Her mother's insights were not like that of an ordinary florist, but of an aristocratic lady. Most of the people in the group had just met, but were already chatting agreeably. After the meal, Rosemary took out a gift bag and presented Bessy with a gift. It was a diamond necklace that was newly released. It looked exquisite and gorgeous even from a distance. Mary's father also thought of his gift when he saw this. He glanced at Mary. Mary hesitated and didn't take it out immediately. Previously, Mary had gone with the flow and presented her gift after Mr. Grint's gift and Daniel's plastic bag. But without Daniel's plastic bag as a benchmark this time, she considered Rosemary's exquisite packaging and lowered her head in shame. Mary's father had already gotten up and was about to leave. He urged Mary,
Hurry up and give Bessy the present. We have to get back quickly. Mimi is still waiting for us. Mr. Smith, why didn't you bring it here?
Marvin thought of the poor cat. Mary's father laughed.
It's not suitable for it to come to the restaurant.
He couldn't help but urge again when Mary still hadn't brought the present out.
Mary, quickly.
Picking up the bag slowly, Mary lowered her head and valiantly handed the plastic bag to Bessy. Bessy, this is a gift from my parents for your final exam results. Bessy reached out to accept it. Thank you. Glancing at the plastic bag in Bessy's hand expressionlessly, Marvin knew that it was the flower again. Because Marvin had mentioned it just now, Rosemary knew that Bessy's deskmate grew flowers and wasn't very curious. She didn't ask much out of politeness and went with the others to walk the Smith family to their van before leaving. Instead of returning to her apartment, she went to the Highline apartments with Michael and Bessy. Bessy didn't practice the violin that evening, instead going to Michael's study to look for a few books. Rosemary and Michael also went to his study. Rosemary was talking to Michael about the company and the Clark family.
The competition is too great. I don't know what antics the World Poker Tour is up to this time.
Rosemary sat down with a teacup in her hand and narrowed her eyes. She didn't shy away from any topics because Bessy was there, but just spoke straightforwardly. Turning on the computer and logging in, Michael read an email Christopher had sent and replied distractedly.
They're working on the EA series of programs and robots.
You have news? Rosemary crossed her legs and stared intently at him. Although they were siblings, she didn't know what Michael was actually up to. It seemed like he always knew all the news and was acquainted with many influential people in America. Michael lazily clicked on the next document and glanced at Bessy calmly. Her movements had slowed a little. He chuckled.
No, it's just a guess.
Rosemary knew that Michael rarely made jokes. Thus, his words were almost invariably true. She held her cup and fell deep in thought. Beside the bookshelf, Bessy simply gave up and took a step back, holding a book in one hand and putting her other hand in her pocket. I'm going to practice the violin now. Before Michael could say anything, Rosemary stood up immediately and accompanied her to the violin room. You're practicing the violin so late? You must have enough rest and not tire yourself out, she told Bessy. Oh, there'll be an auction 3 days from now at 8 p.m. Rosemary continued and smiled gently at Bessy. Lots of novelties can be discovered there. Do you want to come along with me? Bessy held her book with one hand and accepted her invitation. Sure. Sitting in his chair and listening to their conversation, Michael was speechless. Within a few minutes, Rosemary turned back for her bag and said calmly to Michael, I'm going back to the company. She was like a completely different person. Downstairs, Secretary Peterson was sitting on the sofa with a teacup in his hand while talking to Patrick. They stood up when Rosemary came downstairs.
Rosemary.
Patrick had only greeted her out of politeness. Both Rosemary and Secretary Peterson were accustomed to their attitudes now and weren't surprised. When did you come back? Rosemary paused and glanced at Patrick. She was a little curious about his attitude towards Bessy. He smiled.
2 minutes ago. Miss, I just told Patrick about Michael and Miss Flake.
Secretary Peterson bent down and put down his teacup.
They met this afternoon. I guess he has already placed an order for 129. It's useless.
Patrick shook his head solemnly.
The auction house's system is secretive and tight. Even the auction house doesn't know who the seller of the daylily is. If you want to find out, you'll have to get in touch with a senior member of the 129 Club.
But it wasn't that easy to contact them. 129 was too mysterious in Evanston. Even a few hackers in the laboratory had failed to hack into their defense system. Sherry was only an ordinary member of 129, and it was too difficult to find senior personnel. Episode 239. Bessy's Potted Plant. Glancing at Patrick, Rosemary smiled and noted that he seemed familiar with the auction house's internal system. He even knew what level of 129 membership was needed.
Morningbird and Slag Dragon have been very active recently and have taken lots of orders, but their main activity area is abroad, so they might not be able to find the daylily's seller.
That was why he had said that Aaron approaching Sherry was useless.
Of course, if Sherry can invite the lone wolf, I have nothing else to say.
Rosemary listened to him. She couldn't help but massage her temples.
Then, that's troublesome.
She squinted. Joshua would have to hold on despite the pain this month. The auction house sales were basically all bought and sold anonymously. There would definitely be competition over the single bottle of the daylily this month. They were still talking when Marvin came upstairs from the staircase by the bonsai tree, moving a potted plant over very quietly.
Rosemary.
He politely greeted Rosemary, then brought the watering can over. He picked up the tools and carefully placed the potted plant by the floor-to-ceiling window. Patrick had become used to this these 2 days and turned his head away, not wanting to look at it more. But Rosemary and Secretary Peterson stared at Marvin. She raised an eyebrow, then looked away and said goodbye to Patrick. She turned around and was about to leave when a light bulb flashed in her mind. She paused suddenly.
Miss?
Secretary Peterson and Patrick stared at her. Rosemary's grip tightened on her bag. She walked over to Marvin directly and pointed at the pot of flowers he was taking care of.
Marvin, where did you get this potted plant?
Marvin's hand shook and he almost sprayed too much water.
Rosemary, this is Bessy's flower.
He paused for a while before asking,
Is there a problem?
Silently, Rosemary took out her phone and quickly opened a photo for comparison. Of course, there were no two identical potted plants. But the leaves and flower patterns of the potted plant in the photo were exactly the same as the one Marvin was taking care of. Rosemary remembered very clearly that the potted plant was a new product and had only started its trial last month. A total of 2 pots had been auctioned. One was in the Clark family's house, and the others was in the Research Institute. So why did Marvin have a pot here? Without speaking, she remembered that the potted plants had numbers at the back, so she flipped it over, but there was no specific code.
Marvin, can you tear off a leaf for me?
She glanced at him. The leaves of this potted plant were the size of a coin, 5-pointed and star-shaped, with fluorescent blue spots among the green leaves. It was very special, and even without a code, Rosemary didn't think it was fake. Rosemary glanced at Marvin.
I'll have to ask first,
Marvin replied. He sent a message to Mary asking if he could tear off a leaf and give it away. Mary seemed busy and only answered, okay, perfunctorily. Marvin reached out and pulled off a piece for Rosemary. She took the leaf and went back to the Clark family's old villa. Knocking on the door of the Overnight Research Institute, she handed them 2 different leaves for identification. One of them was the leaf obtained from Marvin.
The results will come out in 3 days,
the researcher replied after thinking about it. Rosemary let out a sigh. Sorry to trouble you. 3 days later, the largest monthly auction in the Evanston Underground Auction House opened. In the evening, Rosemary put on a red dress and came to the Highline Apartments to pick Bessy up. They weren't bringing Michael along, so the 2 of them were accompanied by Secretary Peterson. The Underground Auction House was on the 3rd floor of the Black Street Casino. It opened at 8 p.m. Inside was a dazzling sight. The corridor was very spacious, and they took an elevator to the 3rd floor. Bodyguards stood on both sides of the gate. Rosemary took out a black card from her pocket and handed it to them. Within 2 minutes, a doorman wearing black clothes respectfully led them into a room. The room circled the main hall of the auction house, with one-way glass along the front wall so that they could see the auction table and the people sitting below clearly. "Bessy, just press this if you fancy anything." Rosemary pointed to the red button in the middle of the table. She motioned for Bessy to come over and sit down. "Michael will pay." Sitting down next to her, Bessy put her phone on the table and looked at the first auction item brought out by the auctioneer. It was a piece of jade. Rosemary had come for the daylily today, but she would still look out for something suitable for Bessy. Propping her chin on her hand, Bessy felt rather curious about the auction house at first, but her interest faded when she felt like it was no different from the auction house in Austria. Crossing her legs, she took out her phone and started playing games. Rosemary didn't bother her and just looked at the auction items while taking pictures. There were many beautiful ornaments or antiques. After a while, her main purpose today arrived, the daylily. A glass bottle appeared on the auction house's big screen. Secretary Peterson reminded her, "Miss." She nodded. The daylily's starting price was still $1 million, which wasn't considered too expensive. At first, people from the stands below made scattered bids. No one from the rooms upstairs made a bid. When the price increased to $2.5 million, the rooms upstairs started bidding. Once it reached $2.5 million and exceeded the price of the daylily's previous auction, fewer and fewer people increased the price. But there was no shortage of rich people in Evanston.
"There's suddenly only one bottle of the daylily."
Secretary Peterson lowered his voice.
"No one knows what the situation is. If there's no bottle next month."
Obviously, this was what all those bidding for the daylily were worried about. There were usually 10 bottles of the daylily a month, but it had suddenly become 1 bottle this month. The old customers were basically thinking that something had happened to the daylily itself, and this might be the last bottle. Hence, they would pay any price to obtain it. Even at $4 million, the competition was still fierce. After finishing a game, Bessy looked up and saw the small glass bottle on the big screen. She froze. The auctioneer's voice echoed via the microphone throughout the auction house.
$4 million once. Okay, room 11, $4.25 million. Room 6, $4.5 million. $6.5 million.
In less than a minute, it soared above $5 million. More than a luxury sports car. Was this thing so expensive? Bessy's lazy posture disappeared and she put her hand on her forehead, pondering to herself. What's going on? Why are there so many bids? $13.5 million. As she was still musing, beside her, Rosemary hesitated for a moment and was about to press the red button. Bessy quickly stopped her.
$3.5 million thrice.
The moment Bessy stopped her, the auction was successful. Before Rosemary had time to ask Bessy what she was doing, there was a knock on the door. Secretary Peterson opened the door before he even had time to react to the situation. Outside was a middle-aged woman who looked somewhat rigid. She bent down slightly.
"Chairman Clark, our lady knows who the buyer of the daylily is. If necessary, you can go to room 7.
Then she turned and left. Rosemary narrowed her eyes slightly and turned to look at Secretary Peterson.
"Room 7?
Secretary Peterson shook his head and took out his phone.
"I'll ask Patrick."
In the beginning, Patrick and Marvin had accompanied Rosemary to the auctions, but they had been replaced by Secretary Peterson later on. Secretary Peterson mainly focused on Rosemary's company and wasn't knowledgeable about other matters. After a while, he received Patrick's answer. He glanced at Rosemary and coughed.
"It's Miss Flake."
When he said this, he glanced at Bessy out of the corner of his eye.
"Sherry?"
Rosemary repeated thoughtfully, but she didn't have time to think too much, so she turned to Bessy and asked,
"Bessy, why didn't you let me continue to bid?"
Bessy leaned back in the chair with her phone expressionlessly. She tapped the phone lazily with her fingers and tilted her head when she heard this question.
"It's too expensive. Some people were obviously inflating the price."
"I know, but I really need that bottle." Rosemary was naturally aware of the inflation.
"But it's all right. I can just go to Sherry."
Bessy stood up with her arms crossed and said indifferently, "I have one of those." 20 minutes later, Rosemary was back at the Highline Apartments with Bessy and Secretary Peterson.
"Bessy."
Marvin was playing a game with Samuel when he saw them. He stood up quickly.
"Why are you back so early?"
The auction was supposed to last until at least midnight, but it wasn't even 10 now. Something happened. Bessy squinted slightly. Rosemary followed Bessy upstairs with an incomprehensible expression. Bessy's room was next to Michael's. It was decorated in a very homely country style. It was already evening, so Marvin had placed the potted plant from yesterday on the table in her room. The room was sparse and not spacious, but Rosemary didn't have time to pay attention to the room now. Her eyes followed Bessy closely. Bessy opened the drawer of the dressing table. She looked down and rummaged around before asking Rosemary, "How many do you want?" Rosemary was taken aback. How many did she want? She walked 2 steps forward and looked down, somewhat confused. She realized that Bessy's drawer was full of bottles of the daylily. Bessy didn't know how many Rosemary wanted. Seeing that she was silent, she simply took 2 new bottles and handed them to her. Mary had given her 2 bottles when she returned to America. Later, Mary had asked for a few more bottles from her father when Bessy had injured her hand. After that, Mary had given her 1 bottle as a present at her apprenticeship ceremony, and during the meal a few days ago, Mary had given her several more bottles. All in all, she had more than a dozen of them.